From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and welcome to Coast AM. Emerging artists for you tonight for the first couple hours, and later tonight, Archons and Ancient History. Should be a classic Coast to Coast show. Well, here's what's happening. Well, if you fly as much as I do, that crash yesterday in San Francisco really comes close to home. I mean, I could just imagine what those people were going through. The pilot in charge of the Asiana Airlines jet that crashed on landing at San Francisco International Airport had just 43 hours on that Boeing 777, though he did have significant flight time on other jets. The pilot had flown a Boeing 777 9 previous times to other airports, but he was flying the jet to San Francisco for the first time. Asiana Airlines Flight 214 was carrying more than 300 people when it crashed Saturday at the San Francisco International Airport. The tail was ripped off as it crashed, and it burst into flames. The crash of the plane killed 2 people, injured 181. That is miraculous that only 2 died. However, at this time, 22 people in critical condition right now. And another 2 bodies have been found after a runaway train carrying crude oil exploded in a Canadian town. The death toll from Saturday's pre-dawn explosion now stands at 3. Fears that it will rise even higher. The blast sent a fireball and black smoke into the air, forcing the evacuation of 2,000 people. It happened about 155 miles east of Montreal. Nearly 1,300 people were treated for heat-related problems Saturday at a benefit concert for Oklahoma tornado victims. Most of the people received minor treatment at cooling stations. It was just way too hot. When Opportunity left planet Earth on July 7, 2003, many observers expected the rover to survive no more than just a few months on the very hostile surface of Mars. Guess what? 10 years later, Opportunity still going strong, and it's poised to make some even bigger discoveries. How about that? Egypt's new president says pro-reform leader Mohammed el-Baradi has not yet been appointed as the interim prime minister, despite earlier reports. Officials had earlier named Mr. Baradi, a former head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, for that post. The appointment of el-Baradi caused anger among supporters of Mohamed Morsi. He's the one who's been ousted. Civil unrest in Egypt out of control right now. Oil prices jumping nearly $2 a barrel to notch their biggest weekly gain in a year. Why? Concerns over Egypt and, of course, a better-than-expected U.S. economy. In Brazil, unbelievable story there. Police say enraged spectators invaded a football field, that's soccer for them, stoned the referee to death, and then decapitated him after he stabbed a player to death. Apparently, he got into a fight with a player. They were in a fist fight. The referee took out a knife, stabbed the player to death, and then everybody came running in from the stands, attacking the referee, and they beheaded him. Whole Foods Market is recalling Crave Brothers cheese in response to an outbreak of a bacterial infection that has sickened people in several states and killed at least 1 person. Sold in 30 states and Washington, D.C., contaminated with listeria. The cheese was cut and packaged in clear plastic wrap. Look, if you have this, Crave Brothers Les Frères cheese, just be on guard. Jeff Nelkin is our food safety coach. Jeff, what exactly is listeria?
Well, listeria is an organism that is found, in like unpasteurized dairy products. And, the alert that I would like to mention is that the susceptible group are pregnant women, and in 30% of the cases of listeria in that situation ends up in a miscarriage. So it's really important, if you think that you've had exposure to this cheese, that you speak to your medical provider.
Now, is the FDA doing a pretty good job channeling these companies that have these products that might be tainted?
They're getting better and better at it. There's a lot more third-party auditors getting involved, different suppliers. so they're getting support from, private agencies to do a better job at surveillance.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. And Jeff's website, of course, foodsafetycoach.com. In a moment, we're going to talk about subtle energy, how it can change your life. Get ready to use it. Cindy Dale is next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Cindy Dale, author on energy healing and spirituality. Cindy believes and teaches that subtle energy can enhance our lives. She has seen over 35,000 clients and shows them how subtle energy can affect relationships, health, career, finances. So I want to get right into this with Cindy. Cindy, welcome back to the program. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great, George. I'm really happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, too. You talk about energy. You sound like you're ready to go.
Well, when you work with energy, you really have no excuse if you can't use it, too.
Well, when you use the term subtle energy, Cindy, what are you saying? What is it?
Well, subtle is in contrast to physical energy. A lot of people use words like spiritual or psychic or intuitive to describe subtle energy as well, George. But basically, subtle energy, which is not weak, even though it's subtle, is energy that moves faster than the speed of light. So it's the energy that actually, kind of bends all those laws of the universe, that goes around the corners without even going around the corners. So if we can learn to harness this energy, we can literally make things happen. You could even say before you even know they need to happen. And I believe at least 98% of reality is actually formed from subtle energy. This stuff that we typically can't see, can't touch, can't smell, and yet it permeates everything. It's the energy that makes things happen.
Now, this energy, is it in the universe? I mean, is it everywhere, and is it constant?
It's constant. It's everywhere. It's within our bodies. It's outside of our bodies. It's in the television. And, really our ancestors, I think, probably understood it even better than we do, in contemporary times, because they knew that everything was made of it. It's like the stuff of stardust that's absolutely everywhere, kind of like air. You can't really see it, but you can see the effects of it. And that's what subtle energy actually is. In fact, we're probably made, again, 98% of our bodies are made of subtle energy. And our ancestors had techniques for working with this energy and even described an anatomical system, that's just as rigorous as the one that we learn about in biology, for the transporting and the communicating with this subtle energy.
Can this energy be seen or measured, Cindy?
It actually can now, and that's a terrific question. One of the things I really like doing, George, is investigating the science on subtle energy, because for so many years, like when I started my practice as an intuitive consultant, energy healer, about 25 years ago, everybody thought, okay, well, that's a little wacky. That's a little unusual. But people are kind of getting on the bandwagon now because science is catching up and able to use different kinds of photography, computerized programs, equipment called like the squid, which measures magnetic energies. And a couple scientists, in fact, even over in France, were able to prove that qi, one of the subtle energies, that's the Chinese term for it, exists. They actually use radioactive isotopes in the body to track the path of the qi along what's called meridian lines, or, kind of acupuncture lines in the body. So can you imagine what they thought when they saw, a light underneath somebody's body moving where there aren't blood vessels? There isn't a lymph system, but it's the same system that 5,000 years ago the Chinese practitioners, said, hey, that's one of the systems that carries subtle energy. So science is quickly catching up.
About a month or so ago, I interviewed a scientist who has been doing experiments with students on luck. And he basically has said it's all about energy, not luck. And he goes into various casinos, Cindy, and does these energy experiments. And 9 times out of 10, people with the higher amount of energy tend to win more. And, he's concluding that this energy has the ability to change and alter events too.
It absolutely can. And it's scientific because it's real energy. Einstein said forever ago, everything's made out of energy. And, he tried to figure out how mass, something that had weight could go faster than the speed of light. But he didn't think that it could actually do that. In 2000 and 2002, however, in an experiment out in New Jersey, scientists proved that a certain type of light, or, kind of light within light, can actually move faster than the speed of light. So it makes perfect sense to me, George, that if people just know how to really command their energy and move it through their body, it's kind of like turning on a light bulb. If you focus that energy on what's desirable, that's going to affect an outcome. That's going to actually shift what's happening in physical reality. I may have to follow that guy around, though, and learn a few of his techniques.
I know the feeling. We've gotten calls over the years during open line, Cindy, from people who swear that when they walk past light posts, the lights go out. And as soon as they get a certain distance away, the lights come back on again. Now, I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe this is one of those electric seeing eye things on the light, and maybe they blocked something. No, that's not it, because they were always on anyways, whether cars went by or not. But how do certain people have the ability to, with energy, to have these lights go down?
Well, a particular part of their energy system, that's part of this anatomy that runs energy, is so wildly open that it literally, at least temporarily in their presence, shorts out the lights. And if I'm going to be particular, it's in the stomach area. That's the part of the body that affects those kind of phenomenon around us that literally can turn out light bulbs or not. My son is one of those people. I actually was researching it for him because he didn't really want to believe in subtle energy because I'm his mother, and that would probably make him really weird. And I said, well, look, Michael, other people have this happen too. And he goes, that doesn't make me weird like you, Mom, does it? I said, no, it makes you very energetic. It makes you one of those people whose energy projects in such a way that it literally turns off the electricity. And then when they're past, it turns back on. Well, we're made out of electricity too, George. I mean,
sure.
The
body's electric.
Where the body's electric, and it produces an electromagnetic field. So if you think about it, different people are going to have different types of electricity or different types of frequencies or vibrations coming off of them, and it's going to produce different effects depending on who they are, what their personality is, and what's going on with them.
Is this energy, Cindy, like energy from people who might be considered to be psychic vampires, energy zappers of people?
Well, there are psychic vampires, and some people are able to be energetic, to use their subtle energy in such a way that they just produce good things in this world. I mean, you've probably sat across from somebody. Frankly, I've sat across from you doing a television show, and you've got beautiful subtle energy. And I know you're able to perform healing for people if the case, arises. So the subtle energy can produce, awesome, beautiful, wonderful effects, calming people, soothing them, healing them, enthusiastically, kind of supporting them or whatever. And that's what happens if the subtle energy is coming through us or being shared from us. But some people are more devoid of energy, so they suck the energy out of other people.
And some people don't even know they're doing it, do they?
They usually don't. And you'd think they'd wonder why nobody wants to sit around them after a while.
So true.
I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
They're not terribly keen on reading the signals. But
it's
they don't
actually
have
kind of
energy
sad.
inside, so they take it from other people.
But it's kind of sad, isn't it? Because most of them are good people. They're nice. They just don't have that energy glow about them. They exhaust other people when they're sitting next to them. So most people don't want to be around them. I have found with me, and this is funny you bring this up, that some of the worst cases of psychic vampire people that I try to spend time with, because to me it's a science and I want to learn about it. And sometimes it is draining, but I feel as if I really have to be on my energetic kick in order to be around these people, just to learn why they do what they do and how it affects other people. Because if I'm not on my game and I'm around them, they'll wipe you out.
They will. And you've learned to recognize the signs that happen in your own body. I mean, for me, when I'm around them, I start to feel kind of tired, maybe a little upset. Sometimes what they do is pull out somebody's good energy and give them their so-called negative energy. So if I suddenly feel angry or sad or bitter, and I was doing just fine, and I'm around a certain person, I know that they're also doing some energetic exchanges with me. So it really calls for being, like you're saying, on your game or keen within yourself about what's happening. And there's a good technique that I use. If I feel like they're kind of tapping into me and using me as their battery charger, if you would, I pull back, I ask for my own energetic field, that's the energy that's around me, to be sustained, and I just ask for whatever it is you call higher power, presence, divine, helpers, nature, or whatever, to start to help that person. Because then you're giving them a source of energy without you actually getting used up in the process.
I was at a St. Louis restaurant last night. It was my day off, so I'm sitting outside. It was a beautiful night. A lot of friends were coming and going. And a guy that I was just introduced to, former St. Louis Blues hockey player. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to mention his name. He's probably listening right now anyway. But I got to tell you, extremely negative energy. I mean, you could not only feel it, you could see it on his face. I mean, it literally affects them physically, doesn't it?
Yeah, it actually does. I had a client come in a few years ago who, as soon as she came into my office, I felt exhausted. I was like, maybe for the next hour I'll go take a nap instead of helping you. But she looked puckered and sour, and I have a feeling I was really more so-called reading or sensing, her energy, even more than her face or her facial features. But they look a certain way. They look kind of pale, or, sometimes on the other side, if they're really angry people, somewhat florid. And, almost every word that came out of her mouth was negative. This person's ripping her off and that person's ripping her off. And she got quite offended when I suggested that she look for what she could be grateful for in life. And she stared at me like, what? Because I'm not playing into the game. And, it's a way that people get attention. It's a way that they get noticed. And, they don't know that they're coming off that way, or if you point it out, they're certainly not very happy at having it pointed out to them either.
So we know it works scientifically, and as you were mentioning, science is beginning to try to study this and understand it. How important is the spiritual end of it, Cindy? That I think it just might even be more important than the scientific end.
Well, I think it is about spirituality. Like I said right in the beginning, one of the other words for subtle energy is spiritual energy. And, by and large, I think most of us in the West, have been raised in such a way that we're cut off from our own spiritual energy. Actually, the Vedic scriptures, which are the first ancient scriptures, written thousands and thousands of years ago and passed down for thousands of years, suggest the same thing, that there were earlier ages when people understood that they are a spirit and that there are spiritual bodies and spiritual energies, and we're here to express ourselves in that way of oneness and kindness and compassion, and that a long time ago humans got cut off, or we cut ourselves off of those spiritual bodies and the spiritual energies and maybe even our spiritual memories to some extent. And hopefully we're now trying to climb back. We're trying to get back to that summit on the mountain where we can say, yes, we're physical and money's important and activity's important and science is important, and looking at what's going on in quantum physics so that we can prove that time moves in all kinds of directions. All of that is grand, but probably I agree with you, George. What's even more important is to go back to embracing the fact that we're spiritual And because we're spiritual, we're not as limited as we are if we think of ourselves as just physical. We're not limited by our skin. We're not limited by our upbringing, by our religions, by our skin color. We're not limited. Spirit's everywhere, and subtle energy is everywhere. So the means to be the spiritual beings that we are, that exists within each of us, no matter what our histories are.
All right, Cindy, stick with us. We're going to be back with more. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Cindy Dale as well. We'll take calls with Cindy soon enough. Let's ask you, Cindy, about some special things on how this affects relationships, health, career, financing by tapping into subtle energy. But first, why is it so powerful?
It's powerful because it literally at least seems to break Newtonian law. And when we're working with physical energy, George, as we all know, you have to put in effort and work in order to produce change. And you don't get something unless you work for it. You've got to put in the same amount of energy to get the same amount of energy out. But subtle energy works different. It's not fixated in time. It travels in the past, the present, potential futures simultaneously. It can be conveyed instantly. It can go, like I'm even inferring, backward in time or forward to the future or come from the future. So it doesn't have to obey the traffic cops of the universe. And that's really what makes it so powerful, is that it's more of a quantum physics energy than anything else. And quantum physics is that study of subatomic particles and, the energy that really just kind of baffles us because it doesn't need to, we don't have to put in a lot of effort to get something done.
Why is it there, Cindy? Is this something the intelligent designer created? Why is it there?
I believe so. I believe it is probably the energy closest to the Creator's heart. I believe it's the energy that was first created. I think it's the equivalent of when you look in outer space and you talk about dark matter, versus light. It's what's always been, and it's organized in such a way that we can tap into it, and with free will, we can decide what to do with it. The problem is we don't know that it's there. We don't know that we've already been creating, what is apparent in our life, with this subtle energy. And so, most of us haven't been raised to really understand that there is this, I believe, actually conscious and loving energy that's always present for us to tap into.
Well, when we talk about this subtle energy, are we talking about it in terms of it makes people energetic? They're upbeat, they're just ready to go, or is that something else?
It's a factor in it. Subtle energy is also the energy that bonds and links people. So as I'm sitting here, I'm pulsing subtle energy or subtle messages, spiritual or psychic messages that if somebody can tune into them halfway around the world, they can figure out how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what's happening in my liver, what's happening in my brain, what's happening to me emotionally, etc. And people who are able to, kind of be in more of a managed process, I think, with their subtle energy, when they're better able to embrace it and the responsibility of it, usually they are more energetic. Why? Because they're taking in energy from the world, too. They're not just using up the energy that's in their body or comes from food. They're actually able to absorb energy, not in the way that they're stealing it from other people, but they're able to take it in from the universe, from the divine, from nature. They're able to produce their own positive energy and give it out to people. And science studies have shown that the more positive somebody is, expressively, the more positive other people are with them. The better health they have, and they improve the conditions for other people as well. So I think what you're talking about in terms of the energetic person, the uplifted person, that they might even be peaceful guru-like people. It's because they're really clean with their subtle energy and they're able to bring it into their system from outside of themselves in such a way that they're constantly generating more energy. Not stealing it, they're generating it.
All right, let's talk about it in various areas here. Relationships, first of all, how does it work for that?
Relationships are all about subtle energy. I mean, I don't know how many times people come into my office or, a class or, we've all had this experience and say, I don't know why I keep marrying alcoholics. Or I tell myself, I'm going to attract a different kind of gal or a different kind of guy, or I'm not going to pick a fight with my spouse, or I'm not going to lose my temper with my kids, but they keep doing the same thing because they're programmed for that. Because in their subtle anatomy, in the energy centers in their body, those are storage houses of programs. And those programs aren't the ones that we normally access with our conscious mind. They're down in the subconscious. And that subconscious mixes up and works with the subtle energy to communicate to our brain what to do, unfortunately to our mouth what to say or not, and it communicates with other people. It tells them how to treat us. It tells them what our personality is. Even if it really isn't that certain way, it'll tell them, kind of we're this way rather than that. And it draws certain kinds of individuals to us. It might draw only bosses who don't want to pay us to us. It might draw the pink slip to us all the time. So, it can affect work relationships that way. It might draw the same kind of marriage partner to us over and over, the same kind of sour friend, or the same kind of awesome people who smile at you and give you free coffee in coffee shops too. So it's the subtle energy that runs the messages we're sending into the world and determines how people are going to really see or feel us in their subconscious, and therefore how they're going to treat us as well.
Cindy, in a relationship, does someone have to have the same matching kind of energy, or can, the old saying, likes opposites attract? Can you be that way, where one has energy, one doesn't, or do you both need to be firing on all cylinders?
Great question. Well, ideally, we want to be using, and attracting people with our subtle energy and be in relationships with people who match us spirit to spirit, where our true self, our essence, is really what's synchronized with the other person. So we're complementary. We're not filling in each other's holes, but we're complementary. I would want somebody who does handiwork, because I ain't going to be doing it around my house. Okay? So sometimes we have, people with qualities that we need in our life, but we don't want to have somebody who's filling in our holes. What can happen, though, if the subtle energy is programmed in a way that we haven't really addressed it or taken a look at it and it's not working for us, is, we'll attract the people who bring up our worst traits, or who are probably the least healthy for us. And in a relationship, whether they're similar to us or opposite us, they're going to keep doing what we call re-triggering, our problems or our wounds. They're going to re-trigger the programs that we need to change so that our spirit, our essence, our real self can flow forth. That's what we want to have happen in relationship, is we're just coming from that real self. But the subtle energy communicates the real self, but also this programmed self as well.
And some people have magic, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And it's because they just shine forth. They're able to just do it, which is terrific.
Now we talk about health. How does energy help you with health? Look, I'm convinced it works, that you can heal people, that people can also heal themselves with positive energy. I think, Cindy, you can get yourself sick with negativity and everything else. But if you're upbeat and you do the right things, you got to be smart about things. I love a caller that called earlier this week, and part of our guest that talked about everybody can win the lottery if they set their minds to it, but you got to buy a ticket.
Exactly.
And so with health, I still think you got to take care of yourself. You can't eat.
I absolutely am convinced of that too. Though I work with subtle energy and holistic medicine and holistic processes, I also tell people you have to eat right, You've got to sleep. You've got to exercise. You've got to get out there and do your responsibilities. And you need to use allopathic care as well. I unfortunately worked with a woman several years ago who called, and she had a cyst, some kind of a growth in her breast. And I said, I think you should get that biopsied and figure out what's going on. She goes, well, I don't want it biopsied, and I don't want surgery, and I'm only going to do this holistically. And I heard from her a few years later that she died of tumors, all the way around her body. So I only share that story, to kind of say all medicine is energy medicine. Eating good food is working with subtle energy because there's subtle energy in everything. There are studies that are interesting, though, that say the attitude with which you eat food, though, affects what it does in your body. You can eat a piece of chocolate cake, and if you're happy about it and you're not feeling guilty, you actually absorb less of the fat and the sugar.
I believe, as long as you don't eat the whole cake.
You can't eat the whole cake, no, or you're going to look like the cake.
But there's no question, a positive outlook, this using of energy is critical because, let's say stress is the opposite of this energy.
Yes.
It can kill you.
And it will. 97% of all office visits are stress related.
Jeez.
And diseases are really from stress. So, and the ancient Chinese talked about that in terms of how they talked about subtle energy. They said there were 3 different kinds of subtle energy, actually. They said there was spiritual or heavenly, which is the stuff that makes you feel connected and at one with spirit. And that needs to flow all the way through your body, come in you and come from you. There's mental energy, which is about how we feel and how we think. And then there's physical energy, which subtle energy that courses through our body, that sustains the cells and works with the DNA and all of this. And so there's different levels of subtle energy, all of which can get blocked, can get clogged. We don't feel our feelings. That can result in blocked mental energy. And there's been studies, fascinating studies, George, that show, that where people have had different sorts of arthritis or tumors or injuries that don't heal, or et cetera, that light won't pulse through that area. They clear the emotion. They touch the person there, help them feel whatever feelings are blocked in there, and the pain starts to relieve, the condition relieves, and now light, real light, will actually pass through that part of the body.
That's fascinating.
And, so that's, to me, a sign of subtle energy at work. We need to have it moving. We need to be healthy with it. We need to work it physically, mentally, or emotionally, as well as spiritually, in order to really be at our optimum health.
Cindy's going to tell you how to shift your subtle energy to your own benefit. Cindy, what about career and finances? I mean, that would seem far-fetched, but it does work for that too, doesn't it?
It actually does. We gave a few examples in talking about relationships. Let's say you grow up in a family where you're given a real basic message, like only evil people have money, or you can't make more, right? Yeah, I mean, that's kind of out there. Or
maybe they're right.
Yeah, raised you that way. Or it's better to have nothing, or to give everything away, or to give yourself away. Or, I worked with a client once whose father basically implied, at least intuitively, or, kind of with the messages he gave his kids, well, don't ever, cap me financially. I need to be, the most successful person in the family. Kind of the opposite of the American dream, to be really honest. And, not one of those kids ever made a penny more than Dad made. Now, given cost of living and inflation, they didn't make that much money at all. So the client I worked with, had to shift those perspectives on the inside, those locked down, subtle programs. So all of a sudden, he was freed up to make money. And you know what? Within a year of shifting that program, kind of seeing where it came from, forgiving his dad, deciding he wanted it to be different, and, et cetera, shifting the process for himself, he was making twice as much money.
Isn't that amazing how that works?
It's so cool. It's so neat.
All right. Now, here's another question about utilizing subtle energy in a good way. And you tell me if this is correct or not. And if it is correct, what happened? I have seen people be extremely friendly, generous, helpful to other people. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. And for some reason, those people who are extremely helpful and generous and kind out of their heart, they're not doing it for any particular reason, seem to always be successful, or they always seem to get the upper hand, or they always just seem to have better things happen to them. Why is that?
Well, I think it's true. There's a series of studies through the Institute of Heart Math in California that talk about that. And it talks about if you're heart-based, and I'm really underlining that phrase that you mentioned, George, if you come from your heart in an appreciative, generous, compassionate, loving way, so you're generating positive emotions, that energy goes through your energetic field, which passes really infinitely through the world, but it goes at least in a measurable way, a football field away. So anybody within your field in that positive way is frankly going to feel good about you. You're feeling good about them. You're sharing positive energy, uplifting energy, and it's infectious. It turns the other people, on or into a smile from the inside to the out. And it's been proven that people who come from the heart with those positive emotions are more likable and they're more financially successful. They do better at work. They're promoted more often because, frankly, who doesn't want to be around somebody who makes you feel good? And the opposite is true. I have a good friend who was a Lakota elder who years ago said, "Do you know what the most infectious disease is?" And I said, the cold, and he said, "No, it's depression."
I believe that.
Despair, it's negativity. And I do an exercise when I'm teaching a class where what I do is I've had this with 200 or 300 people in the audience where I draw a face, kind of a unhappy face, I hate to say it, on a piece of paper.
Okay. With a frown?
Yep. And I show it to the crowd, and I have a person up in front with their arm out, doing what's called applied kinesiology. You hold your arm, out if your body is in a healthy place, but if you're compromised, your arm's going to go down if somebody pulls on it. All right. The unhappy face, of course, when everybody in the audience is seeing it, but not the person up front, the person's arm goes down. All right, you know that. The happy face, the person's arm stays up. But you know what's happened too? I've had just one person, one plant in that audience, with a card with an unhappy face, and everyone else sees a happy face, and the person's arm will go down.
Huh.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You may want to try it at home. This one you can try at home. Maybe not with 200 people, but with a few people. So it's up to us to keep that positive outlook and attitude. That's the other part. It's that generous person, they're acting that way no matter how anybody else is. So I think that's really key too, George.
I think so too. Cindy, give us your website, would you?
I will. It's cindydale.com. It's spelled funny, CYNDIDALE.com.
I was told a long time ago from a friend of mine who's been a guest on the show, Mariana Korwitz, that the way you spell your name is the way your personality will end up. Did you know that? So if you were just CINDY, you'd be a different person, Cindy.
You know what? I read that too. I had this weird feeling you were going to bring that up on this show too. No kidding.
All right. Well, you stick with us. We've got a full bank of phone calls for you, and not only questions for Cindy Dale, but also share your stories on witnessing some of this energy, whether in relationships or health or careers. I want to see what has happened to you. You shift your own subtle energy in order to enhance your own life. We'll talk with Cindy about that, Cindy Dale, and take your calls and stories next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast, Cindy Dale with us as we talk about, of course, subtle energy and healing. Cindy, before we get to the vast calls here for you, how can people shift their energies?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's 5 basic ways to do it, and some of them are very practical. They're not going to be all about working with subtle energy, but, sometimes we can take physical or emotional action, and it changes our subtle energy and produces, great effects for us. So I think number one is be aware. Start to be aware of how you're coming off, how people are interacting with you, what you like, what you don't like, about what's happening around you, and, really inside of you as well. And secondarily, this kind of hooks to it, George, is, reflect on the past. We talked about in our first segment how subtle energies reflect our spirit, our unique and essential self, but they can also reflect our programmed self, the child self, or our soul, or the part of us that might be more wounded. And, sometimes you just got to plain go into therapy and do the work, or do some of the digging and the excavating that it takes. And thirdly, I think sometimes we have to just plain change behavior. If we do it different, we teach ourselves, we teach the part of us, that's sustaining some subtle mechanisms, that we can do it a different way, that we can think it and feel it a different way.
That's true.
But the last two ways are a little bit more, subtle in terms of how do we go into the subtle realm and really affect change. The fourth way is to really use our intuition. And, intuition, I think, is one of the most important and vital mechanisms for all of us to develop, no matter who we are or where we're at, because it's the way we speak or understand or embrace our spirit and higher guidance as well. And, a lot of people say to me that they don't trust their intuition, or they only figure out that they were being intuitive after they made a mistake, or they wonder how they know how they're intuitive. And, you can learn how to recognize your intuition. It's been working, or we wouldn't still be alive. Basically there's physical forms of being intuitive. You feel things in your body or emotionally. There's spiritual forms of being intuitive. You just have an awareness, or you know something. There's verbal. You get messages, or you hear things from people, or hear voices in your head, and they're not schizophrenic. Or you are very visual. You get signs from the world. You see things, and it makes sense to you. You see a license plate that has a message, or you get images and pictures in your head. And so I think developing intuition is critical, as well as the fifth way, which is to ask for help. Mm-hmm. Using our intuition, ask for signs, for dreams, for clarity, and that gets us in that sense of being in the flow or oneness, with a presence that's greater than us, with guidance, and we can shift if we know we're being helped, not just by our loved ones or the people around us, but I believe there's helpers for all of us. So those are the 5 steps I usually recommend. George, they range from really practical and emotional to, the more mystical, which is really getting in touch with our intuition and realizing that this is a spiritual world, and we can have spiritual assistance for anything we're trying to do as well.
Cindy, why does it seem that so many people are either uptight or unhappy these days?
There's many reasons for it. I think basically.
Do you see it too?
What's that? I see it all the time.
Yeah.
It's constant. Anxiety, they either tend toward anxiety or depression, or a little or a lot of both. And, the people who are more uptight and anxious tend to be very future oriented. They can't be in the presence of the present and say, here I am, I'm going to deal with what's going on. They're constantly worried about what might happen. So then they're really not creating anything but what they're worrying about at some level. And, the more kind of despairing people or depressed people tend to be more stuck in the past, and reliving even subconsciously or unconsciously what's happened, probably afraid it's going to repeat, or afraid that if they break those patterns, break their thought processes, do things or think things a different way, they're going to be uncomfortable, which they will be. And, I think really, though, it comes down to one of our themes that we've been talking about, George, is they don't realize that things are really more about spirituality and spirit than they are anything else. Because if we can get to that understanding, and I'm not talking about religion, if we can get to the place of really knowing that we're an essential being and we're interconnected, there's really not that much to worry about, because, well, the worst thing that can happen is we die and we keep going, in very bluntly. And, the past is the past, but if we can take the wisdom from it, then we can change the future.
All right, let's
they're stuck.
Let's take some calls here for you. West of the Rockies, Glenn in San Francisco. Glenn, thanks for calling.
Hey, George. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you.
I would like to ask your caller or your guest a question.
Okay.
That sounds great. Hi, Glenn.
Standing by.
If you are great, thank you. I'm doing okay. I would like to ask you a question. If you're spiritual, I mean, out of the gate, and we're brought up that way, and we're all of a sudden afflicted by a horrifying disease that no one recognizes.
Sounds like
how
more
do you
Gellens.
deal with this situation?
That's really challenging.
Now,
Is that
I
what
wanna
you're going
spin
through,
this
Glenn?
rock-
Go ahead. Go ahead, Cindy.
Is that what you're going through, Glenn? Is that what happened to you?
That's exactly what I'm going through. And it's, I know everybody that calls your program and has this affliction starts crying, and I'm going to try and not do it. But it is the most horrifying thing that I've ever gone through.
You sound like Glenn. You've got more Gellens. Is that what you have?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We've talked to Cindy. I don't know if you know about this, but this is an affliction that has hit a lot of people where they literally feel things crawling under their skin, and they have little fibers growing out of their bodies. I mean, It's bizarre. So, I mean, how do you even though mainstream medicine really hasn't jumped on it, there's one study going on. How does someone like Glenn use this subtle energy to help himself?
Well, first, Glenn, I'm really sorry you're going through this. Subtle energy, physical energy aside, my heart, just sends you compassion. I can't imagine what it's going through, but I can feel, as you talk, just, some of the pain and the and the questions and confusions that would come from that. Like you're saying, you were spiritual out of the gate, so it must seem like you're being, kind of going through the trials of Job in the Bible, where you're a good person, so why are you being tortured with something that most people can't even begin to understand?
And Cindy, a lot of mainstream medical practitioners will say that this is in their heads. So they point to someone like Glenn and say, no, you don't have this. And I believe they do. But they'd say, you're creating this in your head.
I've had a couple clients with this, too, and they have found the same lack of respect from the medical community, which is what happened to people with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and PMS and all kinds of things, not that long ago, as a matter of fact. So, it is really sad that most institutions, if they haven't seen something before, they say that it doesn't exist. They will also tell you that if they can't cure it, or alleviate it, then there isn't, anything that you can do. And that's where, I would want to give you some hope and argue about it, is, again, I would direct you into your intuition and back into the spirituality that's so real for you and palpable, that must still be alive despite what you're confronting and what you're going through, and find that place inside to get up in the morning and just say, whatever word you use for God, divine, creator, great spirit, nature, to just say, direct me today. How am I to be with this today? I've gone through some kind of challenging health conditions in my past, too, and I have found ways through. Now, one situation I had took me 8 years to get better from. I had a heart arrhythmia, and I was led from thing to thing and awareness to awareness, and it's gone. It's completely gone because I just kind of kept following that path. So I would say stay in that place and that mode, and know that the body's an amazing thing because it really is made out of subtle energy, and when that shifts, the physical body can shift. I'd also really encourage you from just a really practical point of view, to pay some attention to, and this is just kind of more holistic, different bacterial and viral components in here. A lot of these kinds of conditions, need to be treated in the way that we treat like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia in a way the ways that work, with a lot of additional minerals, IVs. There's some holistic processes that can probably be very helpful for you to investigate.
Right. And there are some Morgellon self-help groups out there, Cindy, that I think would give Glenn or anybody else that has this affliction some incredible insight.
Good. And that would be important because you need people who understand you. And then it's really important to share what's been helping and what's been working as well.
I think
so. You're not crazy. The other thing that I would say is you didn't cause this yourself. I find in many spiritual communities or New Age or New Thought communities, there's this thinking that if we get cancer, if we get a problem, if we get this or that because we're made out of subtle energy, we must have caused it. I believe at least 80% of what happens in our lives didn't really originate with us. It's still subtle energy, but it's contained within programs, and it contains programs that could have originated in our ancestors, the people who raised us, the people around us, in our culture. And so one thing I would encourage you to do, is from an internal to external place, just decide you don't want to carry any energies that are not your own as well. We can only work on our own issues. We can't work on anyone else's issues.
Of the various areas, Cindy, that we talked about, relationships, health, or career/financing, what percent of the people are concerned about relationships, do you think?
Oh, that's typically number one, 70%.
Really? 70%?
Oh, yeah.
And then health, finances? Where do they stand?
Health.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'd say 20% health, and then about 10% career and finances.
Whoa, I would not have thought that relationships would have been that high on the list.
It's huge. Well, what happens is people might call me or come in, for a session or whatever, and they might start by talking about finances or health. But you know what? We always end up talking about relationships because it's relationships that really are the core, I think, of the other two. That's my opinion from just doing the work that I do, that underneath it, the people are asking, am I lovable? Am I worthy? Do I deserve love? And typically that's where we land in almost every session.
Let's go to Christian in Los Angeles. Welcome to the program. Christian, go ahead.
Hello, George. How you doing? Long time, I've called in the past. It's good to talk to you. Hello, Sydney. How are you?
I'm great. Nice to hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, not to get too personal, but I'm very, very, I've always had a very nice personality, very loving. I've loved helping people. It's just who I am. I was born in June, so I'm a Cancer. And I just had a problem where in the past, like what you just said about trust your intuition, you hit the nail right on the head. Because I've been through situations in the past where people who I thought were my friends were actually being very deceitful and using me. Mm-hmm. I had to let them go. And the problem I have now is that if you've been through experiences where you've been taken advantage of and you were used, and especially abused, I had a very abusive sister who I cut out of my life because there was no love in the relationship. And I'm in a situation now where, it's just I think trust too much of my intuition to a point where I've become really, cynical, and I have a chip on my shoulder, and I'm not friendly anymore. And I've actually had people say, you've really changed a lot, Christian, in the last 5 years. And also with the fact that the recession hasn't helped me because I'm unemployed. I've been through college. I had all these elevated expectations for a bright future, and all of that crashed. And I feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. So what would be your advice for me?
Well, you're going through a real dark night of the soul, and those are really tough and hard times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can really hear, how challenging it is when you are an upbeat person like you are and optimistic. And, one of the gifts that certain people have, and you have, I actually call it a prophetic gift, to be honest, just in a different context than people usually use biblically, is that we see the best in people. And that sounds like what you have mainly done in your life. And our intuition works a little differently than just seeing the best in people. It's able to sense all of people. It's able to sense, kind of what's suitable for us and what's not suitable for us, who's trustworthy and who's not trustworthy. And this is going to sound kind of funky, but, a lot of people who have that kind of gift that you have, which has to do with really knowing what's real and what's not, what's true and what's not. It's a spiritual gift. It's a very, very strong spiritual gift. Usually at some point learn the lesson. They can't just use their intuition to see the best in people. They have to also see all aspects of people. So I went through something very similar. I was raised in a difficult situation, decided subconsciously I only wanted to use my intuition to see what was good. Went through a lot of disappointments. It's called codependency, energetic codependency, et cetera. And now I'm at a much more balanced place, of being able to kind of like sense what somebody is and who fits me and who doesn't. So I would say, first of all, pay attention to your body and how it's assessing people.
Right.
Can you trust that person for you or not? Doesn't mean they can't be good friends for other people, but your body will tell you. You'll get a feeling, frankly, in your stomach that's going to tell you, is this person kind of like on or are they off? Are they truthful or aren't they? And that's what you have to pay attention to, because some of what might be happening is you've closed off a little bit, because you don't want to get hurt again or burned again or used again.
Yeah.
And so that makes it hard for your energy system to be open for opportunities to come to you too, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So use your intuition and use your body with it. Kind of go with it. Go with what it's telling you is good for you, who's not good for you. And I think things can turn around.
Okay, let's take another quick call. Michelle in Anchorage, Alaska, before the break here, west of the Rockies. Hi, Michelle. Go ahead.
Hello, George. Hello, Cindy. Thank you for taking my call. I was just kind of wondering how I would keep someone else's negative energy from influencing mine.
Well, first decide. There's nothing better than the power of decision. Internally, all the way through your heart and soul and body, I am not going to be swayed by who they are and what they're about. Second, maybe learn a few subtle energy techniques, surrounding your body with light, with colors. Pink is good, not just white. You can use different colors, that give you kind of a buffer between you and other people. And the third technique I always use, I only use two or three techniques in my healing practice, and they're really all you need. I call it healing streams of grace. Just decide that everybody outside of you is connected to grace, is connected to the divine through what I just call streams of grace, through what they need. So they don't need to come into you to take from you. So those are the techniques I would recommend.
And they do work. They really do. How much meditation is involved in this, Cindy?
Everybody meditates different, George. I can't sit for my life, all right? I walk the dogs, and that's how I meditate.
You're type A, right? You got to move.
I got to move. Some people need to do art. Some people need to dance. And some people sit and breathe deeply, right, and do the whole meditative yogic posture. So I think depending on your personality, you've got to be meditative. You've got to get quiet. You've got to get in your body. You've got to get calm. You just have to find your best way to do it.
Well, you sure do. Cindy, stay with us. We're going to come back in just a moment here on Coast to Coast AM, and we're going to take some final phone calls with you with our split show. Well, next hour, we're going live to Belgium to talk to John Lance about some very fascinating information about the archons. That's right, the gods of ancient history. So stand by for that on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Cindy Dale with us, of course, and the rest of your calls as we talk about subtle energy. It is amazing how it works, Cindy, isn't it? It's almost like it's divine providence or something like that.
It is. Well, it's like moving us into divine providence from where we're sitting.
Yeah, it really is. Let's go to Santa Monica, California. It's Dennis's turn on Coast to Coast. Hi, Denny. Go ahead.
Hey, George.
Denny,
another amazing, wonderful show.
Well, you are very welcome. Thank you.
Hey, Cindy.
Hi. Nice to hear from you.
I really appreciate your intuition and your sharing about the network of subtle energy. I wanted to ask, we recently had a plane crash in San Francisco on a nice day. And I wonder if you can comment on what must have been going on subtly, energetically.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading about that too. It's very shocking, and life is chaotic, and this world I don't think operates anymore the way it was originally designed to. I think we've really kind of got two systems flowing through this world at the same time. Probably the original design, which is fairly positive and uplifting and kind, et cetera, and then kind of this sort of dark one that I think most of us are tangled up in, and that the human, soul keeps on reiterating. What I'm really struck with in terms of the energetics of that event is, frankly, how few people died. I know there's a lot who are critically injured. I feel really sad for the families of the two teenage girls, who were killed. But I think that what we need to look at here is how many people survived. So I believe on the subtle level, there were helpers, there were what you might want to call angels, spiritual guides, people's their own subtle systems and unconscious selves reaching out to literally save that plane rather than create a bigger disaster than there could have been. I'm from Minneapolis, and a few years ago, one of our bridges went down, and we did lose some people. I think 11 or 12 people actually died.
I remember that.
If you remember it, if you count how many people could have died, including this entire school bus of kids, it's astronomical what occurred. And I've had clients call me from all over the country, right after one of these horrible events, around the world, a tsunami or an earthquake, and say, I was up all night. I don't know why, but I was just praying. Or I felt like I was just supposed to lend my energy to something that was going to happen. So, I think it's one of those chaotic events. I don't know what the souls might have had to learn, if they had to learn anything at all, if it was just like one of those really horrible accidents. But I think that on the subtle level, there was a great deal of assistance being provided to everybody that was involved in the Boeing crash.
Cindy, are you a believer that when your time is up, your time is up?
I am a believer in that, and I also believe that often we have different exit points. So, for instance, I was told that at a certain age I was going to get cancer, and it could be a time that I would die. And I said, do I really have to do that? I don't really want to do that. And I had precancerous conditions, before I reached 54 or whatever the age was that I heard in my head. I had precancer, and I was able to, kind of get on top of it using allopathic and holistic means, and I'm completely fine at this point. So I think that I was told an exit point, that I could decide to leave, to literally die, but instead I chose to work through a number of issues, face a lot of internal pain, and come through it. So we could have 2 to 4 different exit points in our life as well.
That's the way to do it. Let's go to Pat in Portland. Hello, Pat. Thanks for calling.
Hi. Cindy, I just wanted to call and comment on the caller that called in with Morgellons.
Yes.
And holistic healing and the energy, the oneness, and just being positive and let the life forces. It works. I've had it for 6 years myself, and it's miserable. It's lonely, and it's horrible. There's no words for it. The end of April, I started acupuncture with a wonderful, wonderful holistic healer.
Yeah.
And I'm almost cured.
Pat, Glenn will be so happy to hear that.
Oh, I'm just ecstatic. I mean, I actually had to tell her to slow down. I mean, it was working so well, but a lot of that is like you're saying. She works on your energy, your ki.
She's working on the subtle energy and opening it up and removing the blocks, moving the blocks. Exactly.
Exactly. I just wanted to let you know let everyone know that it does work. But you have to, there's charlatans out there, but you have to be careful. But you're wonderful.
Thank you. So are you, Pat. Thank you for that hopefulness. Again, I'm sure Glenn is thrilled to hear that too. We all need those success stories. So congratulations to you for continuing to search for what was going to work for you too.
Cindy, give us an example of how some of your friends, clients have used the subtle energy for either health, relationships?
Oh, for relationships, that's a great one. I'll give you a wonderful story because sometimes it takes a little more work and time than this gentleman experienced. But this is every so often you got to share your best of the best. He attended a class. I was teaching, I guess, out in Seattle, and a wonderful young man, very attractive, and he said, I haven't been in a relationship for 5 or 6 years. I absolutely can't meet anybody. And he said, and the women who are attracted to me, I kind of go, no, thank you, like not for me. And I said, well, maybe you're coming from, from the subtle perspective, from, what we call karma, from that place where you have to kind of keep learning your lessons the hard way and you just don't want to do it anymore. And so you're not drawing to you, the person that's really going to match who you really are, your spirit. And I looked at him and I said, so you know what? Why don't you just decide you're going to draw in the person your spirit needs? He goes, just like that? I said, yeah, why don't we just do it just like that? And I normally don't like to do predictions in a setting like that, but I was kind of come over, with this sense of saying, it's going to go really fast for you. And you don't really like saying those things because you have to cross your finger at the same time. He called me 6 months later. Within a couple weeks, he met a wonderful woman. They had just moved in together. They were engaged to get married in 6 months. And he said, this is it. He said, I felt the change in me when you said, just let your energy kind of magnify from your spiritual self. And, he's happily married today with a couple kids. So
that's cool.
Isn't it wonderful? That's what we like to hear, too.
Let's go to Brian, Freehold, New Jersey, east of the Rockies. Hello, Brian. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, George.
Sure thing.
I just wanted to ask her, as for astral projection or Kundalini yoga or chi energy for the Chinese, is that in any relation to the energy or subconscious astral plane to better yourself as a whole, as a person? I've read that you can see other people in that plane and go anywhere you want in the world, and
you
can. Any relation?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking that question, Brian. There's a couple caveats to working with what's called the astral plane, which is a plane, a band of energy that comes through us. We're in it, we're on it, it connects all of us, it goes past, present, and future. There's actually 3 different levels to the astral plane. So the only thing I caution people against is making sure that they instruct themselves or anybody that they're working with not to go into the lower astral. That's kind of the deep of the deep. That's where you get kind of some kind of gory and grumpy beings, some of the real lower density and not too kind of beings. So you don't want to be flying through there. And the middle plane is much more about human consciousness and connecting person to person. Often that's the place where when we're dreaming, we might get dreams that we're acting out or guides who come and speak to us or that kind of thing. The higher astral is more of the heavenly astral, and that's the place that we want to do what you're calling that soul journeying in or through. You use your kundalini, which is your life energy. It's a form of chi, that comes through your body to empower your body, and then doing that kind of astral projection or looking, kind of with your intuition at what else is going on is one way to go obtain healing, see events, potentially predict futures, make decisions, etc. So, it takes just a little bit of carefulness so that we don't kind of fall into the wrong hands when we're doing that kind of journeying.
Cindy, are you marveled or baffled at how this all works?
Oh, I'm both. I'm actually in awe. I'm marveled. And what happens, George, is every one thing I learn, there's 10 questions that pop into my mind. Like that hydra, you just can't cut the heads off. They grow more heads. So there is a certain amount of bafflement that I go, okay, I understand this, but I don't understand these 10 things. So then I'm back to reading, ancient scripture or energy manuals or asking for guidance or, trying to figure something else out. I think it's an endless procession of questions.
I think so, too. Jay is in Merced, California. Welcome to the program, Jay. Go ahead.
Hi, and thanks for having me, George.
Sure, Jim.
Cindy,
My pleasure.
I called because, I had to deal with a lot of outside energies coming at me and a family member in my home, and I wanted to know how to clean out that negative energy that's projected,
Yeah, it's a huge issue, isn't it? And I find a lot of people dealing with that. And if they're not dealing with it from a living person, just to put this in here, several people find that they're living, with what I usually call interference or projections coming from energies or entities or, consciousnesses or dead people or whatever the correct term is these days. It's actually even more difficult with the living person because their physical energy, the lower and more dense vibrations are coming into your, kind of physical self, like especially the lower part of your body. The higher part of the body is higher frequencies, so that's a lot to deal with and fend off. So we need to be very physical about it. It can be very, very important, like we've already talked about, to eat right, exercise, move, set up a space within your home, make sure that you maintain the correct distance between you and the other person if need be. And in terms of using energetic techniques, the more present somebody is, the darker the colors you need to visualize around yourself. So you don't really want the whites and the lights. You want the dark golds. You want the dark oranges. You want the dark pinks. You want to, even dark blues. You want to literally create energy like that around you because it sustains your physical energy and keeps you intact. The other technique, amazingly helpful, it's one of those handful that it's really kind of all you need, is when you do what they call grounding, which is getting a sense of you all the way in your feet and into the ground. Pull up elements. Imagine yourself, feel yourself, visualize yourself pulling elements up through your feet, but not just earth. When I was taught how to ground, they just kept telling me to do earth. That made me feel like I was in a freaking coffin. Didn't work for me. I bring air up. I bring water up. There's a lot of different elements that you can work with: wood, stone, air, ether, light. You can Google those up, but you need to bring those subtle elements into your body to sustain your energy, to sustain your electricity, so that you have the magnetic fields around you so that other people's projections can't get into you. So that grounding technique, that bringing those elements up, works for me better than almost anything.
Let's go to Patrick in Toronto, Canada. Hey, Patrick.
How you doing there, George?
Good.
I missed you for a long time, buddy. I like your style, bro.
Thank you.
Just want to talk to Cindy. Cindy, I don't know what to say. It's hard for me to explain this, but I've seen so many damn doctors, and I have something, I don't know if you heard of it. It's called social anxiety disorder.
I have.
Beyond that, it's just caused me a lot of, honestly, so much depression. I can't even get into it, to the point of suicidal, and it's just, I don't know what to do. I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
I've tried so many damn SSRIs, every medication, product changes, hypnosis, I've tried everything, and I don't know how to deal with this anymore.
Oh, I can hear it.
I'm a young guy, and I've always been a young guy, and got along with everybody, been whatever. It's just in the last 10 years I've changed, and I'm not the same dude, and it's killing me.
He wants to fix it, Cindy. How about some quick pointers here?
You know what? It might not be your energy. The very first thing I'm going to say, I mentioned it to one other person, is that if we do everything we can to try to heal something and it's not working, then the energy that's causing the problem inside of us might not have originated with us. So it might be somebody else's anxiety, could be in your family genealogy, could be in your lineage, could be that you're the kind of person who takes that on from other people to help them feel better, right? Because you're naturally a gregarious and caring and giving kind of person. So it might not be your energy in your body causing the anxiety. The social fear may come from having absorbed so many people's anxieties. Now you don't want to be around people as well. Sit down, do whatever it is that you call prayer, use what I call a healing stream of grace, literally like an energetic flow, of energy that you can visualize or sense or feel coming or hear coming through you.
You saying no medications, though?
I'm a believer in medication if they're useful and if they're working.
And they have not been, and I've tried every freaking one, and I'm just tired of this crap.
I get it, Patrick. I have found if there's an energetic issue, medicine often doesn't work until we clear up the energy issue.
But you have to wean yourself off it.
Yeah, you can't just go off of it.
Can't stop.
So
and,
I would say ask Spirit, ask God to help you take out the energy that's not yours. And from that place, like George is saying, think about weaning, but you've got to also put other things in your body, if you're going to go off meds. You've got to put in minerals. You've got to usually most holistic doctors recommend, IV drips with maybe B vitamins, C vitamins, magnesium, etc., so that you start to put into your body what it's missing as well.
I think it's amazing how important it is to mind and body to take care of that simultaneously. Isn't it?
It is, George.
Critical. Let's take a few more calls here. Patrick, thank you, and you keep in touch with us. Cindy,
please do, Patrick. Good luck.
Give Patrick your website one more time, okay?
Cindy Dale, CYNDIDALE.com.
All right, and you'll converse with people? You take emails?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Bill in Baltimore, Maryland. First-time caller. Bill, go ahead.
Yes, George, thank you for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
Cindy, I once was very good friends with a person that was quite sensitive about picking up reactions from people. Mm-hmm. And I noticed she was always had her hand on your arm, leg, anything that she could draw energy from you. Mm-hmm. And I was later taught if I would just take a deep breath and just release it, her hand would come off of me like she was burnt. Now, does that stop someone from being a vampire taking your energy from you?
Well, it's a wonderful technique, so thank you for sharing it for everybody. What you're probably doing in taking in that breath, is you're bringing in spirit. Spirit and breath are the same words in Greek, in Hebrew, and in Latin. You're calling on your own spirit and or a greater spirit. You're filling yourself in, and you're then literally kind of pushing her out is what you're doing. It's kind of like filling in a balloon, and then, that space can't be occupied by somebody else anymore. So that breathing in almost every culture is a really important technique for fueling ourselves, nourishing ourselves with spirit. So you developed or came across a wonderful process for doing that.
Cindy, we are out of time. I want to thank you. You take care of yourself, and I'm sure many coast-to-coast listeners are going to be contacting you through your website. So get ready for that, okay?
I will. Thank you, George. Have a great evening with the Archons.
You are ready. The Archons will be next on Coast to Coast AM, so stand by for that portion, that classic of Coast to Coast. Coast to Coast, we talk about the Archons in ancient history. One of the classics, John Lash joins us. One of his books, Not in His Image, the other, The Seeker's Handbook. Back with John in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, welcome back to Coast to Coast. John Lash is a mythologist, an author, visionary teacher. Now, he's known for his unique approach to the baffling question of our purpose. Regarded by many as the direct heir of Joseph Campbell, John puts into practice the creative mythology that Campbell theoretically tried but didn't, in fact, achieve. And what he calls directive mythology, John presents techniques and guidelines for harnessing the power of myth so that it directs your imagination toward the very sources of life itself. Stand by. Here's John Lash on Coast to Coast, live from Belgium. John, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, George. Good to be on the program again.
It's been a long, long time. What have you been up to?
Oh, I've had quite a few adventures since last we talked. It's an adventurous time for us on the planet here.
Yeah, it really is. And I trust the adventures have taken you to many far-out places?
Well, all my adventures lead me back really to the same place, to the same focus, which for me is the living earth itself. What some people would call, in mythological terms, George, old-fashioned as it may be, the goddess, the mother goddess,
yes,
our Mother Earth. And I find that in my life, in my investigations, and my mystical experiments, if you will, that they all lead me into a deeper intimacy with the living reality of the planet. So that's what my adventures do for me.
You know, I've always thought that the planet, John, is alive, an organism all by itself. Am I off or am I pretty close?
Well, you know, that is not exactly such a wild view. In fact, if you look back in human history, not too long ago, if you go back before, say, the age of the Enlightenment, you know, around 1650, the Western period of the Enlightenment, you'll find that the view of the world that prevailed almost everywhere was animism. That is to say that people in all countries, in all cultures, naturally saw the world, the planet, as animated, that is to say, alive. Now, we've come back to that conception now. It was kind of destroyed and threatened by the rise of materialistic science. You know, because materialistic science would say, well, the Earth is inert, matter is dead, matter is not intelligent, you cannot communicate with the Earth. And with the so-called Gaia hypothesis, and you know what that is for sure, we're kind of returning to this notion of an animated planet, a superorganism.
I believe that, too. And a lot of people are beginning to become more and more aware of it, too, aren't they?
They certainly are, and what's wonderful about it is it's not merely a belief. Animism, as I said in my book, Not in His Image, is not the belief that nature is alive and animated, but it is the direct perception.
Well, that's a good point. And how's the reception been to this new work?
Well, you know, Not in His Image is a challenging book. It's a really, you as yourself, as a trailblazer in many areas of information and knowledge, would understand that a truly original and trailblazing idea often meets considerable resistance, doesn't it?
Oh, it sure does. It sure does.
What is it they say, the three stages of truth? First it's ridiculed, and then it's argued, and finally it's accepted as obvious or something like that?
And hopefully sooner than later, right?
Yeah, because time is running out for the species. No, my book is building. It's building, and it's holding very well in sales, and it's building interest. And I can say that over here in Europe, it's come out in French. It's coming out soon in Spanish. And just about in mid-February, it came out in Italian, actually.
When we talked 4 years ago, were you in Belgium then?
Well, I think I was here because I have a landline here, and I visit frequently Belgium. I don't always live here. I actually travel around Europe quite a bit. Yeah, okay. I was speaking from the same phone. That's right.
Okay. All right, very good. You know, we're going through an intense awakening right now that a lot of people were confused during the Mayan calendar date and December 21st, 2012. And, you know, a lot of people thought it was going to be the end of the planet, you know, and I had said, no, I think it's going to be just the beginning of something new and enlightening. Though I did say I believe that the sun was going to do something in terms of a solar flare of some type, and I still believe that could happen. But was it a disappointment to you, or did you expect the way things unfolded?
Well, it wasn't a disappointment for me at all, George, and I'll tell you why. Because I've studied that subject of 2012 and the Mayan calendar and the Egyptian and Hindu calendars, as you know, all my life. I'm considered by some people to be rather accomplished in the knowledge in that area, you know. So, of course, my attention was drawn to the meme of the December 21st, 2012 event. But I have to say that I view the moment that we're living in now more as a window of opportunity. It wouldn't have to be focused on a particular moment when suddenly everything miraculously changes. So I'm certain that the people who were expecting an event of that kind, of a sudden miraculous change or of massive and devastating earth changes, well, they had to be disappointed, didn't they?
Yeah.
So in a certain respect, 2012 was a bit of a setup, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you have to be careful about those kind of predictions because they will almost inevitably produce disillusionment and demoralization. But on the other hand, if you change the concept, to tweak the concept a little and say, well, humanity is looking at a window of opportunity, then we can say, well, we're still in that window of opportunity, and what exactly can be done, what exactly can be realized at that moment.
John, the planet seems to be going through some kind of flux right now. I mean, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in different regions, there's a feeling of people being uptight here in the United States. We just had the story that I'm sure you're aware of the NSA spying on everybody. Something's going on here. I haven't been able to put my finger on it. How about you?
Well, I look at that very closely, as many of us do these days. We keep hearing this term, waking up, okay? We were told, for instance, that humanity was going to wake up at the 2012 event and so forth. Now you're saying, well, is the Earth waking up in some way? I'll tell you how I see that. I like to use an analogy. Let's say that you and I are not separated by thousands of miles, but we're sitting together in a room physically having this conversation. I wish we could. It would be more enjoyable.
Well, we got to do that if you ever get to L.A.
If I ever get to L.A., right. I escaped from L.A. a long time ago. I don't know if I'm going to be back. But anyway, George, let's suppose we're sitting in the same room together comfortably in lounge chairs. We're having this chat. And over on the other side of the room, there's a huge Bengal tiger, okay?
All right, I'm with you.
Sleeping. A Bengal tiger is sleeping. Now, all of us who have animals, especially cats and cat lovers like me, know that animals appear to dream, don't they?
Yes, they do.
So you can see dogs and cats, you see they're kind of twitching, right?
Yeah.
They're twitching. They can make little yelping sounds. And we think, well, I think, my cat is probably dreaming, So you can tell when an animal's dreaming. So suppose that you and I are in the room with an enormous, humongous Bengal tiger, which is a dangerous animal, when it wakes up. And it's twitching. Its body is switching. We can see it. It's maybe panting, and it's making little sounds. And we look over, and I say to you, hey, George, I think this Bengal tiger might be waking up. Well, that's what's happening with the Earth, you see. The Earth is alive. It's like a Bengal tiger. It's an animal. It's an animated planet entity. And it's my conclusion over a long life of study that the Earth animal mother is waking up. And that is one of the things that accounts for the massive disturbances we see in the atmosphere, and in the geological processes of the Earth, such as the salt domes collapsing, the sinkholes, the massive smokers under the Earth, the subterranean volcanic activity. All of this is an indication that the planetary animal mother is waking up. And the question is, what's going to happen? What does this wake-up process involve? And how can we relate to it? Is it a threat to human existence? Or is it an opportunity for us to connect with the Earth in a way that we maybe lost a long, long time ago? I'm thinking along those lines.
Well, and it may very well be the opportunity. Now may be the time for all of this to kind of click. And I hope it does. You have introduced the term, you did some time ago, archons. And are we talking about gods or rulers? What was your definition?
Well, I'm really glad you asked this question, because I do take credit for that. I did introduce the word archon into the global conversation 10 or maybe even 12 years ago.
Right.
And since then, as you know, this word has become used massively by many, many people. But you see, you asked me what my definition of the archon is. Well, I don't have one, George. The way that I defined archon from the moment I introduced it was not according to my definition. That is to say, not according to some idiosyncratic notion that I might have. But it was a definition true to the ancient source materials where that word is found. And what concerns me today, I mean, in a way, I'm pleased that millions and millions of people are using this word archon because it can be a tool of knowledge of singular importance. But I'm concerned that people use it in a reckless way, and they use it carelessly because they don't refer back to the original sources of its definition.
Well, and that definition, I think, is probably critical. I mean, even David Icke is using it now, isn't he?
Yes, I know. David Icke had started using it. The definition is very critical because this is special intel. I call it mystery intel. You can put a capital M on mystery because mystery, or mysteries, the plural, refers to the ancient sources of that term. I found that term in certain writings that remain, which are derived from the so-called mysteries of the pre-Christian world and the pagan world going back, well, at least 1,600 years ago, and then with a long, long tradition before that. Now, in these mysteries, which were organizations of spiritual education, experiment, and training, hence they're sometimes called the mystery schools,
right?
You know, they had, the teachers of those schools had a very particular fix on this archon thing, this archon entity. And I can tell you that they defined it in three ways. There was a threefold definition, and this definition is not mine. This comes directly from the source materials.
And what are they?
Well, in the first place, they did explicitly, as you know, define it as an extraterrestrial predatory entity.
That's right.
You know that. And that is commonly the way the word is used today, wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm. Sure would. And you know what? They might be right on that one.
Well, these writings, these source materials from the mysteries, which I'm citing, which are in Greek and Coptic language, actually profile these archon as ET predators very, very vividly. And as I've said before, I think we covered this in the first interview I did with you. They described, the ancient sources described, that there are two primary types of this archon predator. There is the embryonic or neonate type. Imagine a prematurely born fetus that has a large head and spindly limbs. Well, of course, this is a description of the gray ET.
That's right.
Of Whitley Strieber. And they included in the profile a second type, which is a more vicious and aggressive type that may be considered to be the overlord of the gray ETs, who are kind of like drones, you know? Mm-hmm. And that type is the draconic, Drakonic, or reptilian type. So it's pretty amazing, I think, that we find the profile of the gray ET and the reptilian types in this ancient material. So that's just one aspect of the definition of archon. It gets even better. It gets better than that.
Don't hold back.
The second thing that can be learned from these ancient sources was that the seers and the shamans of the mysteries, who call themselves teleste, meaning we who are aimed, we who have a purpose, we who are aimed, these accomplished shamans looked closely at this archon entity. They investigated its source, how it appears in the cosmos, how it happens to intrude upon the human species, what is its MO, what's its agenda. And one of the things they determined about these archons is that they can be called rulers or authorities because they wish to rule over humanity. They wish to dominate us and enslave us. But there's a subtle nuance here to get at the beginning. They are not our rulers and authorities over us. They wish to be. I mean, you got to get that difference.
Have they tried?
Yes, they have tried. And the ancient seers pointed out how they tried. They pointed out what the archons have done. and the tools that the Archons use to take over human reality on this planet. One of those tools is religious belief systems. They work through religion. And as a matter of fact, one of the startling revelations of these Naghamati materials, and you're familiar with them, of course,
yes.
Many guests on your show have referred to them, including me. One of the startling revelations about these Naghamati materials is that they tell us, they warn us, that the Archons have introduced into the human mind a delusional belief system under the cover of religion, specifically under the cover of Judeo-Christian religion of salvation. So actually what they say is that the Judeo-Christian religion of salvation is a foreign implant in the human mind. It is a virus.
Implanted for a specific purpose?
Yes, because through that Judeo-Christian belief system of salvationism, and I'll define in a minute what I mean by that, the humanity can be enslaved by these extraterrestrial powers. Now, which, by the way, we looked at one aspect of the Archons, which is they are actually entities living in the solar system with us, but not entities of the Earth. They don't belong to the Earth. They are extraterrestrial. They can't live on the Earth.
And they're
they
physical?
They intrude upon our world through this mental or ideological virus of religion. I've explained this all in my book, as you know.
Yes, you have. And they're physical as opposed to dimensional, aren't they?
They are physical, but they do not physically inhabit our world. In fact, they are inorganic entities, similar to those described by Carlos Castaneda. And as inorganic entities, they have primarily a composition of mercury and silicon base. And because they are inorganic, like any inorganic material, like iron will rust, metal will rust in the presence of oxygen, right?
Yes.
Oxygen is toxic to these Archon entities. So it is, again, a concern to me that people talk about the Archons. They don't really follow the intel of the mystery schools, and people make the rash claim that the Archons can, invade our planet and take it over. They can't. They can't live in the oxygen-rich atmosphere of this planet.
That's good. John, hold on for a sec. We're going to be back more on Coast to Coast AM. And our special guest, John Lash, with us, not in his image. Fascinating about the ancient mystery schools, the Archons, more to come on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. We're with John Lash, his latest book, Not in His Image. John, tell me a little bit about this project you're working on, the Gaian Navigational Experiment. What is that?
Well, the Gaian Navigation Experiment is kind of like a project to restore and recreate in a modern form the system of knowledge and mysticism of these ancient mysteries. It's kind of like, in a way, a return or revival of the mysteries. And to center or focus this experiment, the Gaian Navigation Experiment, I focus it on one single idea. You could say this is like a challenge, is to say, could we go back to those ancient mysteries and look at the sources that remain, the textual sources?
Mm-hmm.
Could we then select and focus on the central message of those ancient teachings and bring it forward today and reapply it, but to redevelop it, actually, in a new form that suits humanity today? This is the challenge behind the Gaian Navigation Experiment. And by the way, I'd like to mention that anyone who is interested in how that experiment is set up and how it's operating can go to the site called GaiaSpora.org, GaiaSpora.org. That is the teaching site for the Gaia Navigation Experiment. And there's another wonderful site which you probably want to even look at first, which is a Facebook page called Sophia's Correction, SOPHIA, apostrophe S, Correction. And that Facebook page was set up by my team, or my crew as I call them, who are pursuing the Gaia Navigation Experiment with me. And it's a beautiful portal into the various aspects of this experiment.
What would you like to accomplish with the experiment, John?
Oh, that's a really great question. Well, you know, there's a remarkable clue in the ancient wisdom teachings that survive from these mystery schools. A remarkable clue. And you could say that the Gaia Navigation Experiment is, in a way, an attempt to follow out this clue. It really relates very closely to the problem of the archons we were discussing. In fact, I probably should just go back and pick up one more aspect of the archon profile in order to answer your question properly. Would it be okay if I do that?
Sure, absolutely.
You know, you'll find something, and I want to ask the people, many people out there who are listening right now, who've heard the use of the word archon, think about what they've actually heard. Because the one thing that's missing, and this really concerns me, is that when people pick up that word now, they do not refer back to the source material that actually tells you how the archons originated. So, for instance, you know, it's interesting that David Icke has picked up this word, and certainly millions of people listen to David Icke. But as far as I know, David Icke has not said what the ancient materials tell us about how the archons came to be in the first place. And this particular piece of intel is the basis of the Gaia Navigation Experiment. It actually posits, or it actually presents a relationship, get this, between the living Earth Mother, the intelligence of Gaia, and the archons. These two things are very closely related, intimately related.
There's no doubt about that. Now, also, you know the work of Zecharia Sitchin?
Yes, I do.
Does that echo any of this? Because, you know, he's talked about some unfriendly visitors who helped seed us.
That's right. Well, Zecharia Sitchin's work is important because it's a great exercise in discernment and discrimination for those who want to, A, see who the archons really are and what they're doing to humanity, and B, well, even more importantly, for those who want to enter into the intelligence of the earth and to collaborate with the living wisdom of the earth. It's very important to realize that Zecharia Sitchin's message is a message of disinformation. And actually, you could consider that Sitchin told the humanity the lie that the archons want humanity to believe. And that lie is that they are our creators. That is not a lie. The archons did not create us. The Mother Earth, Sophia, created us.
Explain that.
Well, the Gnostic, the materials of the ancient mystery schools have made it very clear that there is a cosmology. There is a planetary cosmology of our planet. And so the same seers and shamans in those mystery schools who informed humanity about the archons also told us about the origin of the human race. And this intel needs to be considered together. You can't break it up into parts. It's an entire set of intel. So what the mystery school seers said, plain and simple, was that the genome of the human race, which they call the anthropos, was designed in the galactic center. That is to say, in the core of the galaxy in which the Earth and the solar system are now located. And they said that in that core of the galaxy, which they call the pleroma, there are gods, God beings, which they called aeons. And they said that these aeons, in particular two of them, one who was called Sophia and the other who was called Thelete, actually were like scientists and artists who designed the human genome, the human creature.
That's right.
And then they allowed that genomic plasm to be propagated out in the galactic arms and to arise in different worlds and different planetary systems so that it could develop. And that was their divine experiment, because that's what the gods do. They set up divine experiments, and then they watch how these experiments unfold. Now, I don't know how that particular information comes across to you right now, but I can tell you that in the intelligence community of the ancient mysteries, this was their primary subject of interest.
Were they happy with the end result? Us?
Well, very good question again, George. See, the end result is not yet achieved, you see. What they watched, what the seers watched was they watched how the human experiment, or the divine experiment in humanity, let's call it that, how it unfolded. And one of the things they observed was that it's already unfolded on a number of planetary systems before this one.
I believe that.
Huh?
I believe that.
That's not surprising, is it?
No.
It is surprising to say that we, not only are we not alone in this galaxy. Hey, let's just talk about this galaxy for a while, okay? Our own backyard before we go out to other galaxies. Are we alone in this galaxy, which consists of 300 billion stars, many of which can support Earth-like planets? Do you think that we're alone?
Heck no.
Obviously not. And not only that, it's even better. There are other strains of humanity. Well, they all originate from this primary genomic plasm, but there are other strains of humanity, that is to say, people just like you and me, living on other planets in this galaxy. And so there are a number of variations of the divine experiment with humanity. And what the seers of the ancient mysteries observed was rather alarming. They observed that in 9 of the previous versions of humanity that seeded itself in a planetary world, like the Earth, the experiment crashed. It went wrong, badly wrong.
Was it their fault?
It was the fault of the subject of the experiment, of the human creature itself. In other words, the human creature was placed by divine design in an environment in order to realize certain potentials, and it blew it. It blew it.
Was it like
their environment?
Was it like taking the apple when you shouldn't? Something like that?
No, it wasn't that. It was that the human genome developed in these 9 different strains, these 9 experiments, and in each one of them, humanity turned against its own environment and destroyed its own environment, as we are pretty much doing today. So I use the term Anthropos 10 for the experiment that we are in today, okay? And the other 9 experiments were Anthropos 1 through 9, okay? So Anthropos being the Greek name for humanity, okay?
And these experiments are ongoing, basically.
They all crashed. Our experiment is now ongoing. Hey, let's face it, ours is the one we're in. Let's pay attention to the one we're in. It's good to know about the others, but we need to bring the divine experiment that we are in now, which was originally conceived by divine beings in the galactic core, to its best conclusion, right? To its successful conclusion. And how are we going to do that? Well, the GNE is an attempt to answer that question.
What if we crash and fizzle with this experiment?
Well, all I can say is it's happened before, and it's possible that it could happen, but there are many things at play upon the earth and in the minds and hearts of human beings that could easily prevent that from happening. And so what I say to my team members or crew members in the Gaia navigation experiment is, let's look at how we can turn this experiment around and prevent it from crashing, prevent humanity from destroying its own habitat, and how can we bring human potential into sanity and beauty so that we can really realize a harmonious society on this planet and live here as if it were a paradise, a natural paradise, which it is, of course.
What if we can't do that? What happens if we fail?
If we can't do that, she will take care of the mess and clean it up, and she'll start the experiment over again, which she's done many times before. So in the larger picture of things, if we fail to hold up our part, she will clean up the mess. She will compost a great part of humanity. She will extract that part of the human species which she deems viable to go into another planetary experiment, and she will carry it forward. That's what she will ultimately do. But if I might speak for her for a moment, I would say that as far as I understand the mind of the Earth Goddess, she would much prefer to correct the current experiment, and she would much prefer that some human beings join with her so we can correct it, because we are, after all, the subject of this experiment. So she wants it to succeed on our terms. She wants us to be part of the solution. But if we're not, and if we fail, and if we don't uphold our end, she'll just compost the whole thing and then do it over.
And that's a very high possibility, isn't it?
We're getting real close to that possibility, my friend. But we're also getting equally close to the possibility of what is called Sophia's correction. You see, in this mystery intel, which comes from the Coptic and Greek sources of the Nag Hammadi books discovered in English in 1945, I mean, principally from those sources, but also from a few others. In this intel, they say that the divine Sophia herself, that is the name for the living presence of the intelligence of the earth, that she would reach a point in this experiment when she would intervene to correct humanity's folly and insanity. And you could say that the surviving materials that I've studied, and other scholars as well, contain this clue. It's not so much a prediction of the future, but it's a clue of what possibly could happen in the future. Now, I believe we are in that moment that is designated by this term, correction, which is found in the Greek Coptic writing as the term diathesis. Yeah.
And do most experts in this arena, and there aren't too many, do they all believe this?
No, they don't believe anything like what I'm saying, and they don't even have a concept of what I'm saying, nor would they be able probably to comprehend what I just told you. And there's a reason for that is very clear. Those scholars, there's a book. It's called the Nag Hammadi Library in English. Have you ever seen this book?
I haven't seen it. I've heard about it, of course.
Right. People cite it all the time, don't they?
Yes.
Well, of course they do. Because this book, which appeared in 1976, from a team of scholars in Claremont, California, led by James Robinson, was the definitive English translation of these Coptic and Greek writings that were found in Egypt in 1945, okay?
Were they astounding?
So it's called the Nag Hammadi Library in English. There's a huge problem. This is the source material that I'm drawing from, but there's a huge problem with this source material and the people who translated it. First of all, they are scholars and historians of religion from the Judeo-Christian tradition. They have interpreted the mystery school teachings through the filter of Judeo-Christianity. Well, there's a big problem there, because the mystery school teachings were pre-Christian and in many respects anti-Christian and anti-Judaic. These Nag Hammadi writings are the writings of heretics, religious heretics, who were against the Christian belief system of salvation and the paternal Father God and the Messiah and the Apocalypse and all that. And so how is it possible that these scholars could have presented to the world a fair and accurate translation of these materials? They did not. I am the only scholar of the Nag Hammadi materials. And by the way, I was born on the week and probably the day these materials were discovered, if you like coincidences. I'm the only scholar who represents them from the point of view of the people who wrote them. And so when you represent and develop these source materials from the viewpoint of the pagan mystery school teachers and shamans, then you get the scenario that I am giving you now. But you're not going to find it from these other scholars who have their blinders on, their religious and ideological blinders.
Why don't they accept this?
I don't think they're interested in it, frankly, George. I think that the scholars, apart from myself, because I'm the only self-declared pagan, John Lash is a pagan. What does that mean? I'm the self-declared experimental mystic. It's like, to just give you a really stupid example, but suppose that someone gave you a manual on how to play golf. Okay?
I'm not sure it would help me.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you play golf? I don't know, George.
I used to hack a long time ago.
Right.
But,
imagine someone gave you quite a technical manual on the ins and outs of golf with all golfing terms and diagrams, and you didn't know what golf was. Wouldn't you be puzzled reading this manual?
I don't think I'd understand it if I didn't know what it was.
Right. The scholars, the religious scholars, the experts in the Coptic language who have translated these precious materials, which contain the very birthright of humanity, pointing us to our origins, our divine origins, are not mystics. I am a self-confessed mystic. So I can interpret material that is written by mystics and comes directly out of the intimate sanctuaries of the ancient mystical tradition, because I am myself a mystic. But they can't interpret it, and I don't think they're interested. They're only interested in the Nag Hammadi writings as they kind of reflect on maybe various aspects of early Christianity.
Right. And are those writings very accurate, in your opinion?
Those writings are a bunch of gibberish, and like the notes of some college student attending a professor's lectures who scribbled down various notions but didn't really totally even understand the lectures, but then in some places did understand them. The Nag Hammadi writings, as I've said before, and I stand by this, are written in a pseudo-language, which is Coptic, which is not a real language. It's like stenography.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, John, when we come back. Plus, we'll take phone calls with you next on Coast to Coast AM. And we're with John Lash. He is live in Belgium. His work, Not in His Image. We're going to come back and talk more about mythology. And also, we'll take your calls on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. John Lash with us. John, before we take calls, let's get back into the Nag Hammadi. And you say it's a bunch of gibberish, but explain a little bit more about that.
Well, the way it's been translated comes across as gibberish. But actually, there are precious gems of wisdom in this material. And to anyone who is drawn to that material, I suggest you go to my site, medihistory.org, and there's a guide to reading the Nag Hammadi materials, which would be helpful to get to the core of what is in these materials. And I'd like to just take a moment to say what that is and to make it crystal clear to the many people who are listening to us right now. The Nag Hammadi materials contain the unique expression of the Sophianic message for humanity that is not found in any other myth or any other source materials, to my knowledge. I am a comparative mythologist, so that means that, like Joseph Campbell, I have looked at many myths from different cultures around the world, and I have compared these myths. So I've made an inventory of different myths that explain the origin of the human species or things like that, big questions, what is human purpose, so forth. And I can tell you, and this is not an opinion, this is a fact, that the myth of the goddess Sophia, who is the source of our life and the source of this planet, that is contained in those Nag Hammadi materials is totally unique. There is no other myth like it in this world. It is the single coherent planetary myth that humanity has. And it can be found, the elements of that myth can be found in the Nag Hammadi writings. And what I did in Not in His Image, and also on metahistory.org, is I restored that myth the way someone might restore, say, a mosaic that was damaged.
Right.
Yeah, I restored that myth. I'm the only scholar who has restored it in 9 episodes. And that myth, by the way, a myth, as I use it, is not a lie or an illusion. It is simply a story form that encodes truth and encodes knowledge. This myth encodes the knowledge of human origins, the origin of the earth itself, the origin of the archons, the difficulty of human deviation from nature, the difficulty of the problem of the sexes, and many other aspects of the human experiment. And it is the only myth, to my knowledge, the only sacred narrative that does so.
How closely, John, does it echo the Bible, if at all?
It doesn't echo the Bible at all. Not at all. It's completely different. And as a matter of fact, the scholars and seers, they were also educators and great teachers, the authors of the Nag Hammadi material, were very opposed to the biblical story of creation and the idea that Adam and Eve transgressed the rules of the Father God and that they would need to be punished, and that there is a chosen people, which is master race theory in the Bible, in case you're wondering where it originated, that there is a master race or chosen people, and that the Father God sends the Messiah, and that everyone will be judged at the end of time. All of this that you find in the Bible is completely alien to the Sophianic message for humanity. The Sophianic message is a message of beauty, it's a message of power, it's a message of empowerment of our innate intelligence and our gifts, and it's entirely different, and it is the one single message that can overcome the toxic indoctrination of Judeo-Christian religion. And the people who presented this message for us, those teachers of the mystery schools, they knew that. They knew that it was the single teaching for humanity that could free us to our own true destiny as a species, and that they opposed the teaching of the Bible and of the Messiah and all that jazz.
These authors of the Nag Hammadi, specifically, do we know who they were, John?
You know, we don't know very much about who they were. And you might ask, well, why not? And it's because in the mystery schools, see, the mystery schools of which we have evidence from antiquity. See, there are the mystery schools that left some evidence, and then there is the long tradition that produced the mystery schools, which goes back probably about 6,000 BC. And we have very scant evidence of that. This is the picture that I've been able to put together. There was an order founded by a community of seers and shamans, both men and women, founded in northern Iran near the on the Urmian Plateau, which was called the Magian Order, Magian. And the Magian Order carried this story. It carried this sacred intel that I'm sharing with you now, which eventually came down into the Nag Hammadi writings. And so the mystery schools and the tradition of spiritual learning that produced the Nag Hammadi came from the Magian Order, okay? A very ancient order. Now, there was a rule among the teachers of the Magian Order, and that rule was taken up by the authors of the Nag Hammadi material. It's a rule of anonymity. That is to say that they carried a responsibility to teach humanity about its own origins and to teach us our true story of who we are and where we came from. And in that, they chose to remain anonymous. They did not want to take credit upon themselves for carrying this story. They wanted the story to speak for itself. The Sophianic planetary story is the divine birthright of humanity, and it belongs to all of us. So it doesn't it can't be attributed to a single person. And they were very careful about that. So that's why you find almost no mention of the names of these teachers. There's maybe half a dozen or a dozen names mentioned, and we don't really know, who they were. Hypatia is the most famous name from that tradition.
Whoever they may be, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to the calls. James in Kansas City, Kansas. First-time caller. James, you're on with John Lash. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you this evening, gentlemen?
Good.
I wanted to ask your guest how this correlated with the Gnostic Gospels and their assertion that Sophia mothered a beast, which was called Yaldabaoth, that is proclaimed to be the Lord of this world and the God of the Jews.
Who wants to be the Lord of this world, but is actually not the Lord of this world. This question is a great question because it brings us back to this point of the archons, George. Remember, I was saying there are three aspects to that profile of the archons, and I didn't get to the third one.
That's right.
Well, the gentleman caller just brought up the third one. Now, this is a scoop. Are you ready? Fasten your seatbelt, because I guarantee you nobody has ever said before on your program what I'm going to say now.
All right. Here we go.
And in answer to the caller, thank you very much. And also, my disclaimer, what I'm going to tell you now is not John Lash's idea, okay? It is taken from the Coptic Nag Hammadi materials. The myth of the Aeon Sophia, the divine Sophia, who is our mother, who designed the human species in the galactic center, says that when she came out of the galactic center, this is called the fall of the wisdom goddess, and when she accidentally entered the realm of the galactic limbs where these planetary experiments arise, she impacted the matter of the galactic limbs in such a way that she actually accidentally produced a bizarre alien species called the Archons.
Really? Interesting.
And so it is actually our very Earth Mother who produced us, who also produced the Archons by an accident, by a cosmic accident. That is exactly what the story says.
Where are these Archons now, John?
These Archons now inhabit the solar system. They inhabit the solar system, and that is their proper realm. They belong in the solar system. They constructed the solar system. But the solar system, please bear this in mind, apart from the sun, moon, and earth. They did not construct the sun, which is called Sabaoth in the Greek Coptic materials that the calling guest is citing. Sabaoth, the sun. And the Archons were given the task by Sophia herself to occupy themselves by creating a kind of theme park because they were an annoyance to her. She is a goddess from the Pleroma center, from the highest realm of divinity. She didn't expect to accidentally produce these critters. And so she gave them the task to occupy themselves by producing a planetary system. So they are the engineers and inhabitants of the inorganic part of the solar system. You know, science tells us that the solar system consists of an inorganic and an organic part, which are interlocked. Have you ever considered that picture?
That is an interesting picture. I haven't considered it, though.
As a matter of fact, these seers who wrote the Nag Hammadis really regarded the Earth as not part of the solar system. Why not? Because the Earth is a living organism. It's alive. It's the body of Sophia herself. It's the body of our divine cosmic mother. And so the Earth is alive. The Earth is organic. The moon is part of the organic system of the Earth, and so is the sun. But the other planets are inorganic. So in fact, what we have in the solar system is an organic system of three bodies captured in an inorganic system. And this is a serious problem in cosmic affairs. But Sophia herself is the source of this problem. Am I getting this across clearly?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
So one thing I want to warn people out there, those of you who hear anybody but me using the word Archon, you want to ask this question. For instance, Jay Widener, is a colleague of mine, uses the word Archon. You want to ask this question: Does Jay Widener, who uses that term, tell you what the Coptic materials say about the origin of the archons? No, it doesn't. This is the problem, and David Icke doesn't either. So they're taking the term out of the sacred intel of the mysteries, but they're not giving you the background of the term. And that is so important, because unless you know the background of the term, unless you know the whole story, you're not going to be able to see how we're going to deal with these archons.
Let's go to Alan, Atlanta, Georgia. Go ahead, Alan. Thanks for calling.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Al.
Just making sure it was me.
Yeah, it is you.
Well, that guy just kind of blew something I was asking, but I got a question for, actually 3 questions.
Well, let me tell you what. Your phone is so bad, I'm not sure I can
hold
get
on
any.
just a second. I'll fix
All right.
I'm outside. Is that better?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Sounded like you
3
were in a
questions.
windstorm. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm actually on the ocean, and I'm enjoying creation.
Well, you should.
I should, because there's not much left. But I got a question for both of these guys, actually. If this guy, one, does this man think that Jesus himself was actually, when he talked about the Holy Spirit, was talking about Gaia herself, which I actually now believe might be the case. And the other one is,
I don't understand that question.
Is he
about
aware of the Roswell dissection tapes, which I actually know somebody whose his grandfather was in charge of the dissection.
Oh, now you're not talking about the one that Fox showed, right?
Well, actually, the Roswell dissection of the aliens, they were actually found not to breathe oxygen in the same levels as we do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if he might believe that maybe what's going on now could be terraforming for the archons to come to this planet, and maybe Gaia's getting a little PO'd about it.
All right. And why don't you rephrase that first question, Alan, just so we understand it more?
Yes, concerning Jesus.
Do you believe that Jesus might have been talking about the Holy Spirit and not insulting her, being the Gaia herself? And maybe that Jesus might have been created for that purpose, to let us know that if we're with her, we can also create other worlds.
Well, that would be a great way to consider Jesus. You know, there are thousands of ways to consider Jesus. And but, you know, there are some clues to the sacred intel of the mysteries. Very few, but there are some in the New Testament. And some people have, you know, speculated that Jesus might have been, you know, a heretic or a Gnostic or something like that. I don't want to necessarily go down that rabbit hole, but I will say that, yes, there are mystics. Even the great astronomer, Johannes Kepler himself, who was a mystic and an astrologer as well as an astronomer, said that the Holy Spirit is Sophia, that is to say, the living earth. And also, you find that same assertion in some of the ancient materials of the Nag Hammadi writings. Now, as far as the aliens, archons, terraforming the earth, you know, this is a crucial piece of technique when you think about the archons. When you think about the archons, you always have to think very carefully about what they would like you to think they do and what they actually do. You know? So it's rather like dealing with any authority, or dealing with the NSA or FEMA or any authority or ruler. Anybody who wants to have power over you. This could be the local town preacher, you know.
Sure.
That individual will want you to think that they have more power over you than they actually and really have. That's the art of deception. That's the art of stealing your power. So I would say that the ancient seers of the mysteries warned us about the deception of the archons. They actually called them angeloi of deception, angels of deception, messengers of deception, because angeloi means the messenger, of course. So you want to be very, very careful. Sure, I'll tell you my scoop, my hit. The archons who live outside the Earth can't live here. Even if they ravage the Earth, they would have to ravage the whole planet and lower the oxygen content to under 10% for them to take over this planet. And even then, they would be destroying the very habitat that they wish to conquer. And so their agenda is very aggressive and vicious in regard to humanity and the Earth, but it's a dead-end agenda. It's absurd. And you're right, Sophia is reacting, and she is providing a way to protect humanity against this archonic menace. That's what the GNE is about. It's about understanding how we can turn this experiment around.
Well, let me tell you one thing, John. Fascinating theories indeed. I want to talk with you a little bit about the draconians when we come back in just a minute.
Sure.
Would you give your website out for us, John, or how people can
Sure. The
track
website
you?
that contains my commentaries and writings on the Nag Hammadi material and the ancient mysteries is metahistory.org. Okay? META history. And then the teaching site for the Gaia Navigation Experiment is gaiaspora.org, and the Facebook page is Sophia's Correction.
Super. We're going to come back in just a moment here on Coast to Coast AM with John Lash. If you need to email me, you can do that just as easily at george@coasttocoastam.com. george@coasttocoastam.com, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter by going to our website and click those icons in the far right-hand corner. We shall be back with final phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, do take advantage and watch our television show Beyond Belief. It is provided via the internet. It is 10 days free. Plus, you can look at volumes of incredible videos. Simply go to our website, coasttocoastam.com, click hosts, and then the TV button opens up, or go to GaiamTV.com/George, GAIAM TV.com/George, and watch the program. I hope you like it. On our next Coast to Coast program, by the way, Rosemary Ellen Guiley joins us as our main guest as we talk about dreams, the Pocket Dream Guide. And then we will be right back with final phone calls here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. John Lash with us, of course, and we're going to take your calls. John, how did these ancients know this? How did they understand all this?
Well, they understood it through the development of faculties that they have, which we today would call paranormal faculties.
Mm-hmm.
Clairvoyance, clairaudience, the ability to remote view. There's an enormous amount of talk about these paranormal faculties, right? You've had many guests on your show who actually concentrate on that subject. The thing to understand about the seers of the mystery schools is that they didn't work as individuals, because they realized that an individual with its own, even if it develops its own psychic and paranormal faculties, will have a difficult time verifying their investigations. There's a danger of going into fantasy with these faculties, or there's a danger of receiving information that you don't know how to interpret correctly. So they worked in teams. They worked in groups of 2, 4, 8, and 16 over long generations, and various teams passed on the torch of the knowledge that they were developing by shamanic investigation to the succeeding generations. And so what you have, if you look at that picture over a long trajectory of time, you have an intelligence community working in teams, concentrating continually on the same questions. What is human purpose? What is the purpose of this experiment we're in? Who created this experiment? Where did the archonic intrusion come from? What can we do about it? They continually repeated these questions, and working in teams, they developed this sacred intel. But they did it with the very same faculties that every single person listening to me has. Inherently, we as human beings are endowed with these abilities, and we need to use them intelligently and in a sober and disciplined way, and not recklessly. But were we to do so, were we to train ourselves to use them and to do it together and compare each other's findings, then we would be on the same path that these ancient seers were on before our time.
Very good. The final calls now. We go to Roger in San Francisco. Raj, go ahead.
Hi, George. I don't even know where to begin. This guest is a new low in terms of frauds. It's just astounding that this guy even got on the show. But let's try and rescue a little bit of sanity here. First of all, Sophia. Okay, it's the same root as the word philosophy. That is the love of wisdom. Sophia is in the feminine. It's the goddess of wisdom. Now, the master would have been Plato, the master pagan, if you will. I mean, come on here. This is just ridiculous.
Well, hold on, Raj. Hold on for a second. What is it that you don't agree with him on?
With anything, he's just
name one thing. Be concrete. Be specific. Name one thing that's fraudulent.
No, let's name one thing that is truthful. First of all,
name one thing that's fraudulent.
You've used probably 3 dozen words, none of which you know the meaning of. You don't
name one word that I used that's fraudulent.
You got to be specific if you're going to make some kind of allegation. Come on.
Okay, well, let's go back to the goddess of wisdom. Okay, now this is a product of mind. Wisdom is an intellectual faculty. Yes, reason.
Listen,
rationality.
I don't want to hear your rap.
Okay,
I want to hear you.
Are we clear that far?
What's fraudulent?
Huh?
This is not your program. This is my interview. Tell me what I said that was fraudulent.
Everything. Every sentence that's come out of your mouth.
Raj, I'm going to let you go. I mean, you're not being specific. And, here's the other thing. This is your opinion. This is your interpretation. He may have his own. That's what life is all about.
Yeah, that's true, George, but it's not entirely true. That's not the whole picture. Because, sure, you have your interpretation, I have my interpretation, but the question is, when we look into metaphysical and spiritual matters, as well as when we look into science or biology, what's your interpretation based on? That's the key. So I might have my interpretation of photosynthesis.
Well,
but unless my interpretation of photosynthesis is based on actual verifiable knowledge of science, it could be fraudulent. It could be delusional,
Well, no. To me, fraudulent is some intentional misleading.
Yeah, you're right.
And you know what? As far as I'm concerned, this is your research. These are your opinions. And if somebody doesn't agree with it, so be it. But that doesn't mean it's fraudulent, for crying out loud.
That's right. And besides, the Sophianic message, which is basically what I'm presenting, because that's my pleasure and my mission in life, my agenda is very clear. I want to present the Sophianic message. And in the Sophianic message, the central figure is Sophia. But she is not merely some abstract principle of wisdom. She is identified as the actual living planet. That's her name. That's the name that these seers gave her. And they told us how she became this planet. But they also told us, and this is so amazing to me, things that happened to her before she turned into the earth. And one of those things was that she actually accidentally produced this draconic monster. They gave it a name. They called it Ayaldabaoth. It's a draconic, archontic monster that lives in the solar system, probably on Saturn, if you would say that's its headquarters. I think Saturn is the headquarters of the Archons. You brought up that word, Dracon, and I thought I'd get back to it, George, because you mentioned it.
Yeah. Now, I think the devil may have been one of these things.
Yeah, well, the devil is this figure, Yaldabaoth. It is the reptilian overlord of the Archons. That's the exact definition. That's his profile. And what the Gnostics, or what the heretics of the mystery schools said that caused them to be targeted and murdered and eliminated was that they came out to the early Christian ideologues and the teachers of Christianity, and they said, oh, by the way, we'd like to point out something to you, if you don't mind. We belong to a tradition of shamanic investigators who have been working for many centuries together in teams, and we came to the conclusion that this entity that you call Jehovah, who is the supreme father god of your new religion, is actually a demented reptilian alien working against humanity.
Let's go to Michael in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Hey, Michael, go ahead.
Hi. Yes, the front page of this weekend's Wall Street Journal has color portraits of two popes who are about to be elevated as saints.
Yes.
Which actually means they will become gods. They will be eligible to receive prayers from human beings on this earth. Now, the Gnostic controversy came about at just about the time in around 325 A.D. that Constantine, the Greek, the Sophia-loving Greek, decided that he was going to merge his empire with the church that was about to conquer it.
Right, the new religion. He married the Roman Empire with the new religion. That's very correct, you know?
Right. Well, we're seeing that duplicated right here because the earth has gone to war against Central and South America, producing unbelievable poverty down there, so that they're running up here to this Protestant country where we don't worship the popes and we don't pray to any of the saints of the Catholic Church. We're now putting ourselves in the position, because we got nothing but the Vatican Party, USA, controlling the country right now in Washington. We're putting ourselves in a position where we're going to be hit by tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes of unprecedented dimension because we're allowing these demon-worshipping people to control this great Protestant republic.
Well, you know, one of the mind-control tricks of religion and of the Catholic Church in particular, this is a classic mind-control trick of the Catholic Church, is that they warn humanity, oh, watch out for those demons, you know, be careful of demons, or we'll come and exorcise you, or you must do the Mass to protect you from demons. But they are actually the instruments of the most demonic forces on the planet themselves. The shamans of the mysteries were the first ones to point out, like I said before in the first hour, that Judeo-Christian religion, including Catholicism, is the instrument of archonic deceit working into the human mind. And we're now in a battle. Religion is a battleground, and we are in the culminating stage of the battle between the lovers of Sophia and humanity and Yaldabaoth, the reptilian alien god. This is what is actually transpiring on the planet as I speak.
How do you feel about all the various religions, John? I mean, Michael was just basically saying the United States was and is Protestant. I think it's more than that.
Yeah, I do too. I think there's a big problem with religion on this planet, and I know that I take a risk of looking bad when I diss religion or when I attack it. But just let me say this. If all of those people listening to me who consider themselves to be religious, whether Protestant or Catholic, believe in the spirit of coexistence, then wouldn't you say that the very least that any true religion can do, if it claims to be a path of peace and love, would be to allow coexistence? Wouldn't you say that's the minimum requirement?
Probably, yeah.
So then I would say, okay, you allow me to coexist. Allow the Sophianic message of the mysteries to coexist. Allow it to be known, celebrated, discussed. It has been repressed for 1,600 years. Allow it to come out. Allow it to coexist alongside Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, and then see what people choose. See if they would choose the way of Sophia, who is the planetary animal mother, and see if they would choose to follow her story and to live in the beauty and power of her presence. We haven't had that opportunity. And that's one of the reasons why humanity has gone so far down the drain, and we're blowing this experiment.
Let's go to Lorene in Sacramento, California. Hello, Lorene. Go ahead.
Hi, George. John, I think you almost answered my question. I wanted to know how the Judeo-Christian religion played into the hands of the archons to help.
It is both the evidence and an instrument of the archons, and that's not my interpretation, my friend. It is my way of stating what is found in the warnings of the Nag Hammadi materials.
Yeah,
some of the Nag Hammadi writings explicitly warn against the Jehovah as a false alien god. They're explicit about that.
Okay.
But how does that play into the hands of the archons? How they can control us with that?
Well, you see, the archons are frustrated about something. They really can't come down here and land and take us over and enslave us like in some science fiction movie or War of the Worlds. They have to achieve a victory over humanity if they
divide us, and that's the way they conquer, right?
By remote control. They have to do it by remote control. They fight proxy wars. Does that remind you of any other enemies that fight proxy wars?
Yeah, many do.
The archons fight proxy wars.
Let's go to Brett. Let's go to another quick call. Running out of time here. First-time caller, Brett in Baltimore. Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, George.
Hi.
And Jonathan. I guess this actually plays into a few things that you were saying. I guess the archons and how they use the Christian church to deceive us and distract us.
Right.
How they portray the pagan deity Baphomet as the devil.
That's right.
But my question is, the pagan deity Baphomet actually appeared to me, materialized in front of me, in that sort of religious position that you would see the Virgin Mary or Jesus posing in, with 2 fingers up and 2 fingers down, and with his legs crossed.
Sure.
Just sort of floating there, looking at me, and it really just changed the way I think about everything. And I was wondering what you think about that.
Well, the Gnostic scholar Hugh Schoenfeld decoded the word Baphomet. You can go read the Passover plot where he describes this. That was a momentous achievement in scholarship of the mysteries. And he showed that the word Baphomet is a coded form of the word Sophia. So what Baphomet is, that animal pan image that is wrongly equated with the devil or Satan, represents the animal powers of the Earth Mother herself, the animal powers of Sophia. So I would say that what you had was a projection into your imagination of a very powerful and benevolent force of the Earth itself, and that was a very fortunate experience for you.
Okay, next up, Xander in Manhattan. We'll squeeze you in here. Go ahead.
How you doing? How you doing, sir? I wanted to ask you about the word pagan and where does it come from and its basic modern origin.
Sure. Very happy for that question. Good way to conclude the interview. I call myself a pagan. Pagan comes from the Latin root paganas, which means country, a country dweller, somebody who lives in the country. And I am a pagan for the fact that I live in the country. That's a literal definition. The more advanced definition means that a pagan is someone who sees the divinity of the natural world. Therefore, I do not look outside this world for divinity or even for my connection to divinity. I find it in nature. I find nature to be animated and filled with divine presence. Someone who sees and meets the divine presence in nature, that is a pagan. And who reveres and respects nature and puts humanity in the frame of nature, that is a pagan.
Why is this so controversial, John?
Well, because when Christianity took over and suppressed the ancient mystery schools, it had to demonize the knowledge that they had in order to make people reject it. Because the knowledge that I am sharing with you of the Sophianic message is so beautiful, compelling, and so obviously makes sense that in order to get people to reject it, they couldn't get people to reject it by argument or persuasion. They had to demonize it. And so the word pagan was turned into a word that was meant someone who had no morals, who had no sexual boundaries, and worse, who performed human sacrifice and worshipped all kinds of evil demons. You see, it's a demonization of something that is essential for human survival. And that demonization has caused us to go insane. The influence of religion is to turn humanity toward insanity, but the Sophianic message leads back to sanity.
John, great job again. John Lash, all his information at coasttocoastam.com. For Nathan Staten, Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Laudesor, Stephanie Smith, Chris Borles, George Knapp, John B. Wells, Ian Punnett, and Art Bell. I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see.
The fact that we're spiritual, and because we're spiritual, we're not as limited as we are if we think of ourselves as just physical. We're not limited by our skin. We're not limited by our upbringing, by our religions, by our skin color. We're not limited. Spirit's everywhere, and subtle energy is everywhere. So the means to be the spiritual beings that we are, that exists within each of us, no matter what our histories are.
All right, Cindy, stick with us. We're going to be back with more. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Cindy Dale as well. We'll take calls with Cindy soon enough. Let's ask you, Cindy, about some special things on how this affects relationships, health, career, financing by tapping into subtle energy. But first, why is it so powerful?
It's powerful because it literally at least seems to break Newtonian law. And when we're working with physical energy, George, as we all know, you have to put in effort and work in order to produce change. And you don't get something unless you work for it. You've got to put in the same amount of energy to get the same amount of energy out. But subtle energy works different. It's not fixated in time. It travels in the past, the present, potential futures simultaneously. It can be conveyed instantly. It can go, like I'm even inferring, backward in time or forward to the future or come from the future. So it doesn't have to obey the traffic cops of the universe. And that's really what makes it so powerful, is that it's more of a quantum physics energy than anything else. And quantum physics is that study of subatomic particles and, the energy that really just kind of baffles us. Because it doesn't need to, we don't have to put in a lot of effort to get something done.
Why is it there, Cindy? Is this something the intelligent designer created? Why is it there?
I believe so. I believe it is probably the energy closest to the Creator's heart. I believe it's the energy that was first created. I think it's the equivalent of when you look in outer space and you talk about dark matter, versus light. It's what's always been, and it's organized in such a way that we can tap into it, and with free will, we can decide what to do with it. The problem is we don't know that it's there. We don't know that we've already been creating, what is apparent in our life, with this subtle energy. And so, most of us haven't been raised to really understand that there is this, I believe, actually conscious and loving energy that's always present for us to tap into.
Well, when we talk about this subtle energy, are we talking about it in terms of it makes people energetic? They're upbeat, they're just ready to go, or is that something else?
It's a factor in it. Subtle energy is also the energy that bonds and links people. So as I'm sitting here, I'm pulsing subtle energy or subtle messages, spiritual or psychic messages that if somebody can tune into them halfway around the world, they can figure out how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what's happening in my liver, what's happening in my brain, what's happening to me emotionally, etc. And people who are able to, kind of be in more of a managed process, I think, with their subtle energy, when they're better able to embrace it and the responsibility of it, usually they are more energetic. You know why? Because they're taking in energy from the world, too. They're not just using up the energy that's in their body or comes from food. They're actually able to absorb energy, not in the way that they're stealing it from other people, but they're able to take it in from the universe, from the divine, from nature. They're able to produce their own positive energy and give it out to people. And science studies have shown that the more positive somebody is, expressively, the more positive other people are with them. The better health they have, and they improve the conditions for other people as well. So I think what you're talking about in terms of the energetic person, the uplifted person, that they might even be peaceful guru-like people. It's because they're really clean with their subtle energy and they're able to bring it into their system from outside of themselves in such a way that they're constantly generating more energy.
Change and alter events, too.
It absolutely can, and it's scientific because it's real energy. Einstein said forever ago, everything's made out of energy. And, he tried to figure out how mass, something that had weight, could go faster than the speed of light. But he didn't think that it could actually do that. In 2000 and 2002, however, in an experiment out in New Jersey, scientists proved that a certain type of light, or, kind of light within light, can actually move faster than the speed of light. So it makes perfect sense to me, George, that if people just know how to really command their energy and move it through their body, it's kind of like turning on a light bulb. If you focus that energy on what's desirable, that's going to affect an outcome. That's going to actually shift what's happening in physical reality. I may have to follow that guy around, though, and learn a few of his techniques.
I know. I know the feeling. We've gotten calls over the years during open line, Cindy, from people who swear that when they walk past light posts, the lights go out. And as soon as they get a certain distance away, the lights come back on again. Now, I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe this is one of those electric seeing eye things on the light, and maybe they blocked something. No, that's not it, because they were always on anyways, whether cars went by or not. But how do certain people have the ability to, with energy, to have these lights go down?
Well, a particular part of their energy system, that's part of this anatomy that runs energy, is so wildly open that it literally, at least temporarily in their presence, shorts out the lights. And if I'm going to be particular, it's in the stomach area. That's the part of the body that affects those kind of phenomenon around us that literally can turn out light bulbs or not. My son is one of those people. I actually was researching it for him because he didn't really want to believe in subtle energy because I'm his mother, and that would probably make him really weird. And I said, well, look, Michael, other people have this happen too. And he goes, that doesn't make me weird like you, Mom, does it? I said, no, it makes you very energetic. It makes you one of those people whose energy projects in such a way that it literally turns off the electricity. And then when they're past, it turns back on. Well, we're made out of electricity too, George. I mean,
sure. The body's electric.
The body's electric, and it produces an electromagnetic field. So if you think about it, different people are going to have different types of electricity or different types of frequencies or vibrations coming off of them, and it's going to produce different effects depending on who they are, what their personality is, and what's going on with them.
Is this energy, Cindy, like energy from people who might be considered to be psychic vampires, energy zappers of people?
Well, there are psychic vampires, and, some people are able to be energetic, to use their subtle energy in such a way that they just produce good things in this world. I mean, you've probably sat across from somebody. Frankly, I've sat across from you doing a television show, and you've got beautiful subtle energy. And I know you're able to perform healing for people if the case, arises. So the subtle energy can produce, awesome, beautiful, wonderful effects, calming people, soothing them, healing them, enthusiastically, kind of supporting them or whatever. And that's what happens if the subtle energy is coming through us or being shared from us. But some people are more devoid of energy, so they suck the energy out of other people.
And some people don't even know they're doing it, do they?
They usually don't. And you'd think they'd wonder why nobody wants to sit around them after a while.
So true.
I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
They're not terribly keen on reading the signals. But
it's
they
actually
don't have
kind of
energy
sad.
inside, so they take it from other people.
But it's kind of sad, isn't it? Because most of them are good people. They're nice. They just don't have that energy glow about them. They exhaust other people when they're sitting next to them. So most people don't want to be around them. I have found with me, and this is funny you bring this up, that some of the worst cases of psychic vampire people, that I try to spend time with.
More third-party auditors getting involved, different suppliers. So they're getting support from, private agencies to do a better job at surveillance.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. And Jeff's website, of course, foodsafetycoach.com. In a moment, we're going to talk about subtle energy, how it can change your life. Get ready to use it. Cindy Dale is next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Cindy Dale, author on energy healing and spirituality. Cindy believes and teaches that subtle energy can enhance our lives. She has seen over 35,000 clients and shows them how subtle energy can affect relationships, health, career, finances. So I want to get right into this with Cindy. Cindy, welcome back to the program. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great, George. I'm really happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, too. You talk about energy. You sound like you're ready to go.
Well, when you work with energy, you really have no excuse if you can't use it, too.
Well, when you use the term subtle energy, Cindy, what are you saying? What is it?
Well, subtle is in contrast to physical energy. A lot of people use words like spiritual or psychic or intuitive to describe subtle energy as well, George. But basically, subtle energy, which is not weak, even though it's subtle, is energy that moves faster than the speed of light. So it's the energy that actually, kind of bends all those laws of the universe, that goes around the corners without even going around the corners. So if we can learn to harness this energy, we can literally make things happen. You could even say before you even know they need to happen. And I believe at least 98% of reality is actually formed from subtle energy. This stuff that we typically can't see, can't touch, can't smell, and yet it permeates everything. It's the energy that makes things happen.
Now, this energy, is it in the universe? I mean, is it everywhere, and is it constant?
It's constant, it's everywhere, it's within our bodies, it's outside of our bodies, it's in the television. And, really our ancestors, I think, probably understood it even better than we do, in contemporary times, because they knew that everything was made of it. It's like the stuff of stardust that's absolutely everywhere, kind of like air. You can't really see it, but you can see the effects of it. And that's what subtle energy actually is. In fact, we're probably made, again, 98% of our bodies are made of subtle energy. And our ancestors had techniques for working with this energy and even described an anatomical system, that's just as rigorous as the one that we learn about in biology, for the transporting and the communicating with this subtle energy.
Can this energy be seen or measured, Cindy?
It actually can now, and that's a terrific question. One of the things I really like doing, George, is investigating the science on subtle energy, because for so many years, like when I started my practice as an intuitive consultant, energy healer, about 25 years ago, everybody thought, okay, well, that's a little wacky. That's a little unusual. But people are kind of getting on the bandwagon now because science is catching up and able to use different kinds of photography, computerized programs, equipment called like the squid, which measures magnetic energies. And a couple scientists, in fact, even over in France, were able to prove that qi, one of the subtle energies, as the Chinese term for it, exists. They actually use radioactive isotopes in the body to track the path of the qi along what's called meridian lines, or, kind of acupuncture lines in the body. So can you imagine what they thought when they saw, a light underneath somebody's body moving where there aren't blood vessels? There isn't a lymph system, but it's the same system that 5,000 years ago the Chinese practitioners, said, hey, that's one of the systems that carries subtle energy. So science is quickly catching up.
About a month or so ago, I interviewed a scientist who has been doing experiments with students on luck. And he basically has said it's all about energy, not luck. And he goes into various casinos, Cindy, and does these energy experiments. And 9 times out of 10, people with the higher amount of energy tend to win more. And, he's concluding that this energy has the ability to From the heartland of America on the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and welcome to Coast AM. Emerging artists for you tonight for the first couple hours, and later tonight, Archons and Ancient History. Should be a classic Coast to Coast show. Well, here's what's happening. Well, if you fly as much as I do, that crash yesterday in San Francisco really comes close to home. I mean, I could just imagine what those people were going through. The pilot in charge of the Asiana Airlines jet that crashed on landing at San Francisco International Airport had just 43 hours on that Boeing 777, though he did have significant flight time on other jets. The pilot had flown a Boeing 777 9 previous times to other airports, but he was flying the jet to San Francisco for the first time. Asiana Airlines Flight 214 was carrying more than 300 people when it crashed Saturday at the San Francisco International Airport. The tail was ripped off as it crashed, and it burst into flames. The crash of the plane killed 2 people, injured 181. That is miraculous that only 2 died. However, at this time, 22 people in critical condition right now. And another 2 bodies have been found after a runaway train carrying crude oil exploded in a Canadian town. The death toll from Saturday's pre-dawn explosion now stands at 3. Fears that it will rise even higher. The blast sent a fireball and black smoke into the air, forcing the evacuation of 2,000 people. It happened about 155 miles east of Montreal. Nearly 1,300 people were treated for heat-related problems Saturday at a benefit concert for Oklahoma tornado victims. Most of the people received minor treatment at cooling stations. It was just way too hot. When Opportunity left planet Earth on July 7, 2003, many observers expected the rover to survive no more than just a few months on the very hostile surface of Mars. Guess what? 10 years later, Opportunity still going strong, and it's poised to make some even bigger discoveries. How about that? Egypt's new president says pro-reform leader Mohammed el-Baradi has not yet been appointed as the interim prime minister, despite earlier reports. Officials had earlier named Mr. Baradi, a former head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, for that post. The appointment of el-Baradi caused anger among supporters of Mohamed Morsi. He's the one who's been ousted. Civil unrest in Egypt out of control right now. Oil prices jumping nearly $2 a barrel to notch their biggest weekly gain in a year. Why? Concerns over Egypt and, of course, a better-than-expected U.S. economy. In Brazil, unbelievable story there. Police say enraged spectators invaded a football field, that's soccer for them, stoned the referee to death, and then decapitated him after he stabbed a player to death. Apparently, he got into a fight with a player. They were in a fist fight. The referee took out a knife, stabbed the player to death, and then everybody came running in from the stands, attacking the referee, and they beheaded him. Whole Foods Market is recalling Crave Brothers cheese in response to an outbreak of a bacterial infection that has sickened people in several states and killed at least 1 person. Sold in 30 states and Washington, D.C., contaminated with listeria. The cheese was cut and packaged in clear plastic wrap. Look, if you have this, Crave Brothers Les Frères cheese, just be on guard. Jeff Nelkin is our food safety coach. Jeff, what exactly is listeria?
Well, listeria is an organism that is found, in like unpasteurized dairy products. And, the alert that I would like to mention is that the susceptible group are pregnant women, and in 30% of the cases of listeria in that situation ends up in a miscarriage. So it's really important, if you think that you've had exposure to this cheese, that you speak to your medical provider.
Now, is the FDA doing a pretty good job channeling these companies that have these products that might be tainted?
They're getting better and better at it. There's a lot.
Because to me, it's a science, and I want to learn about it. And sometimes it is draining, but I feel as if I really have to be on my energetic kick in order to be around these people, just to learn why they do what they do and how it affects other people. Because if I'm not on my game and I'm around them, they'll wipe you out.
They will. And you've learned to recognize the signs that happen in your own body. I mean, for me, when I'm around them, I start to feel kind of tired, maybe a little upset. Sometimes what they do is pull out somebody's good energy and give them their so-called negative energy. So if I suddenly feel angry or sad or bitter, and I was doing just fine, and I'm around a certain person, I know that they're also doing some energetic exchanges with me. You know, so it really calls for being, like you're saying, on your game or keen within yourself about what's happening. And there's a good technique that I use. You know, if I feel like they're kind of tapping into me and using me as their battery charger, if you would, I pull back. You know, I ask for my own energetic field, that's the energy that's around me, to be sustained. You know, and I just ask for whatever it is you call higher power, presence, you know, divine, helpers, nature, or whatever, to start to help that person. Because then you're giving them a source of energy without you actually getting used up in the process.
I was at a St. Louis restaurant last night. It was my day off, so I'm sitting outside. It was a beautiful night. A lot of friends were coming and going. And a guy that I was just introduced to, former St. Louis Blues hockey player, and I'm not going to mention his name. He's probably listening right now anyway. But I got to tell you, extremely negative energy. I mean, you could not only feel it, you could see it on his face. I mean, it literally affects them physically, doesn't it?
Yeah, it actually does. I had a client come in a few years ago who, as soon as she came into my office, I felt exhausted. I was like, you know, maybe for the next hour I'll go take a nap instead of helping you. But she looked puckered and sour, and I have a feeling I was really more so-called reading or sensing, you know, her energy even more than her face or her facial features. But they look a certain way. They look kind of pale, or, you know, sometimes on the other side, if they're really angry people, somewhat florid. And, you know, almost every word that came out of her mouth was negative. You know, this person's ripping her off and that person's ripping her off. And she got quite offended when I suggested that she look for what she could be grateful for in life. And she stared at me like, what? Because I'm not playing into the game. And, you know, it's a way that people get attention. It's a way that they get noticed. And, you know, they don't know that they're coming off that way, or if you point it out, they're certainly not very happy at having it pointed out to them either.
You know, so we know it works scientifically, and as you were mentioning, science is beginning to try to study this and understand it. How important is the spiritual end of it, Cindy? That I think it just might even be more important than the scientific end.
Well, I think it is about spirituality. You know, like I said right in the beginning, one of the other words for subtle energy is spiritual energy. And, you know, by and large, I think most of us in the West, you know, have been raised in such a way that we're cut off from our own spiritual energy. You know, actually, the Vedic scriptures, which are the first ancient scriptures, you know, written thousands and thousands of years ago and passed down for thousands of years, suggest the same thing, that there were earlier ages when people understood that they are a spirit and that there are spiritual bodies and spiritual energies, and we're here to express ourselves in that way of oneness and kindness and compassion, and that a long time ago humans got cut off, or we cut ourselves off of those spiritual bodies and the spiritual energies and maybe even our spiritual memories to some extent. And hopefully we're now trying to climb back. We're trying to get back to that summit on the mountain where we can say, yes, we're physical and money's important and activity's important and science is important, and looking at what's going on in quantum physics so that we can prove that you know, time moves in all kinds of directions. All of that is grand, but probably I agree with you, George. What's even more important is to go back to embracing